for the Department of Energy to welcome you.
Thank you all for coming up. I'll skip out in the middle. I earned a grade for toughness. I had back surgery last Thursday, so the fact that I'm walking around should just tell you, you got to play hurt when you're the Hanford manager. So just, my name again is Brian Vance. I'm the manager of both of the offices that oversee the cleanup of the Hanford site. The Officer of Protection is responsible for the tank farms and the waste treatment plant mission, and then the Richland Operations Office is responsible for the rest of the site mission overall. I'm really excited for you to be here today. I think the relationship between the department and the Hanford Advisory Board and the Hanford Advisory Board members and the constituents you represent is really important for us in our work to make sure that we are communicating clearly the work that we do, establishing a strong relationship and a working relationship with the members of our community who are most affected by our work. And we help you understand and make it accessible to you the very dynamic and broad spectrum of work we accomplish at the Hanford site every single day. Our top priority as the Department of Energy with our contractor partners is the health and safety of our workforce. We have a workforce of roughly 10,000 people across 6 prime contractors, and that doesn't include the subcontractors that the primes hire to come onto site to do the work. So we roughly have a site population between 11 and 13,000 people working to move a mission forward of national prominence. We have made tremendous progress over the last couple of years. This summer was really great for us because I kind of looked at it as a site unveiling. After the COVID pandemic hit, we really didn't have a lot of visitors on the site, but our contractors working with labor, working through all of the processes to establish conditions for a safe and healthy work environment really progressed the mission of the site. You'll see some of the site this afternoon. It'll just be an introduction to what we do. And I hope that as we continue this relationship, we'll be able to come routinely, get you up to speed on the things that we're doing, help you understand why we're working on the projects that we're working on. We operate on a budget between the two offices of roughly $2.7 billion per year, which is a significant budget. We do a lot of great work, but we could always use more funding. We're funded by Congress. All the funding we have at the Hanford site comes from Congress, and so we deliver taxpayer value by safely, efficiently executing our mission. That value makes it easy for Congressman Newhouse, Senators Murray and Cantwell to go compete for funds for us, and we're grateful for their support, and we enjoy great support from them. So I just really wanted to give you that high-level overview. You'll get a lot more. It's more than you'll be able to understand and appreciate as you get into this learning experience and this experience with the Hanford Advisory Board. But we're here to make this experience positive for you, constructive for you, and I look forward, I know with the members of my team and the contractor leadership to engage with you and help us make this important mission accessible and view the successes that we all make together as a real contribution, a true contribution to the health and safety of our community and the entire Pacific Northwest. So thank you for being here. I know you're gonna have a great day, a great HAB meeting tomorrow, and I look forward to working with all of you. Thanks for the time.
Very good. Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you so much. And thank you for the welcome, Jan. I'm Lacey Mancius. I'm part of the facilitation team. Our facilitator, Ruth, is sick at this time. Well, she's just recovering. She will be ready tomorrow. So we're going to move on next to having everybody introduce themselves. Oh, yes, Dave Enan. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and I'll keep it short and I want to echo Brian's welcome and my thanks for you all being here and for those that are still on the teams. I welcome your participation and energy. The Hanford cleanup mission is important. Again, I'm with EPA, and that's what we do as cleanup. So it's important to me as well, and my folks. And we rely very heavily on what we get from the advisory board. The advice we get, the communications between us and you and your constituencies and back. We need to hear those messages. It's a dynamic and it's a very special thing that we've got here. And I really appreciate the fact that you're willing to volunteer and be part of this. It's again, I've been with the Hanford cleanup for over 30 years, so I've seen most everything, and I'm just really glad that we can be here and be here together in 3D and not just on the screen. And again, welcome. I hope you have a great day. The other faces, EPA faces you'll see in Somerville area, Roberto Armijo will be around, and Jeff Schramm is another one that you'll see a lot, but he's in another meeting. So again, welcome. Have a great day.
Thank you, David. Who's speaking for the Washington State Department of Ecology? Ryan Miller.
Hi, I'm Ryan Miller. I'm with Ecology. I'm a communications manager. David Bowen was going to be here, but he had a conflict come up last minute. He will be here in a couple hours. He'll still drop in and introduce himself, so he'll have some words to speak about ecology at that point. But for now, I just echo what Brian and Dave largely said. But again, Dave will be on a little later to talk to you all. And again, I interact with the HAB a lot, and then Ginger Wireman's also other comp staff. I'll interact with you guys a lot. So you'll see a lot of us, and you'll see a lot of Dave Bowen as well as our other staff. You can go ahead and do Robin.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, EPA David Enan, Ecology, Ryan. And we also have Mike Birkenbile, our DVFO. And I also want to tell you all that this meeting is being recorded. Ruth, you got on. Thank you for joining us. I see your face. I was just going to turn the time back to Jan for the round robins to have everyone go around. Is that good, Ruth?
Yeah, that's good. If anybody finds my voice, please give it back.
Sorry, Jan.
So I'm glad that Ruth is still in charge, even though she's only on the TV. So the next person that I want to introduce you to is Mike Birkenbile, who, as Lacey said, is the DDFO. Now, this is just one of many acronyms you're about to learn. The Deputy something Field Officer. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning and welcome. Mike Birkenbile, Deputy Designated Federal Officer. So I have responsibility. I'm appointed for the day-to-day operations of the Hanford Advisory Board. I'm working really hard not to use acronyms because I think we're setting up where it's like a quarter in the jar every time you use one. So I want to take the opportunity to welcome you and express my sincere appreciation to a number of people who are responsible for everything that you're going to see here today, talk about here today, and then the trip that we're going to take onto the Hanford site later on. Our interim chairs, Jan and Sue Coleman, the teams from Ecology and EPA, Ryan Miller, who spoke a moment ago, Roberto Armijo and Jeff Schramm work a lot in the backgrounds, our facilitation team, and just a number of others. And I know, please know that there's a number of folks I'm leaving off in there in just that summary. So I'll be brief. Welcome. Look forward to your participation, not only today, but in the future. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, Mike. So is there anyone else on that opening list who needs to be introduced?
Do you want to introduce Gary?
Or we can wait till.
Gary Younger.
Hi, how you doing?
Officer.
My name's Gary Younger. I'm the federal coordinator for the HAB, and I am solely devoted 99% of my time to you. So first off, I'm thrilled you're here. This has been a lot of work to get to this point, and we've got a lot coming up, as Mr. Vance, Mr. Enan have already mentioned, and just want to welcome you here. If you have any questions, problems, or whatever, I'm the guy who will be taking care of you. So you all should have contact information on how to reach me, and I will help solve your problems. Mike and I work very closely together to make sure that you have what you need so that we can move forward. And understand the site and provide great actionable advice. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And although she wasn't on the list, I would like to introduce to you our distinguished past president, chairman of the board, Susan Leckban. Will you just stand up and say hi?
Glad to see you all.
Excellent.
At my age, I'm glad to be anywhere, especially here.
Thank you, Susan. And she also brought a box of apples to share, which is something that we are delighted to be able to partake in. So I'm going to begin with the round robin introductions, and I'm going to model it for you so that as we go around the room this way, and you people who are sitting at the back, I think that you should also introduce yourselves, even if you're not like right up to the table. So we'll just try to go around and make sure everybody gets an opportunity to say their name, to say, you know, what they represent or where they work or where they're coming from, and something about why they have decided that they want to be a part of this organization. So my name is Jan Cottrell. I have been on the HAB since 2014. I'm a retired customs officer. I know you all have issues with the customs. And when I was working with customs, I got interested in hazardous materials. And so naturally I gravitated to one of the most contaminated places in the world on a volunteer basis. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy that you're here as well.
Buenos dias. My name is Roberto Armijo. I am with the EPA. I've been with the EPA for just shy of 2 years. I am one of the video project managers at the Hanford office, and yeah, I also enjoy participating with the HAB.
So Susan is next.
Sorry, I tend to jump up and down and move around a lot. So what was?
Your name, like where you come from, what drew you to this?
Susan Holman, former military, former married to a Navy nuke, so former commercial nuclear experience, a little bit of everything. I've been around the site here since about 92, retired in about 2014, and I've just always been interested in seeing the site clean up.
Excellent. Dieter?
I'm Dieter Borman. I represent Hanford Contractor Central Plateau Cleanup Company. I've supported the HAB in various capacities since 2010. Previously, I had a Brian Miller position way back when, but keep coming back, keep volunteering to provide communication support for this board. A lot of great discussions, a lot of new faces, obviously, but look forward to meeting many of you over the next coming days and weeks and months here.
Thank you.
I'm Deb Durgan, and I work for Hanford Mission Integration Solutions. This is my first year here, and I'm a communication support person for Gary Younger. And I'm just excited to be here and get to know all of you.
Thanks, Deb. Denise?
Hi, everyone. My name is Denise Jones. I am part of the stakeholder Citizens for Clean Eastern Washington with Todd Martin. I currently live in Kirkland, so on the other side of the mountains. And I am here. I got interested in the HAB while as a graduate student at UW-Bothell with Dr. Shannon Cramp as my advisor. And my husband's family, he was a third generation Hanford employee. And I'm happy to be here and be part of the team and what I can do to help.
Welcome. Tracy.
Hi, I'm Tracy Arnold, and I believe I represent the Hanford workforce. I work for Hanford Laboratory Management Integration, and that's the lab that runs the 22 lab out at the site. And I've lived in the Tri-Cities for 20 years and also work at Hanford, so I'm very interested in Hanford.
Thank you.
I'm Rob Parmalee. I work for Bechtel. And my badge says non-management, non-union. So I'm not sure what that really means. I'm ex-Navy, Navy new. Most of my background is commercial nuclear power. I moved out here in 2007. I live in Richmond, and I think that's probably where what my interest in is in HAB. I was asked about joining this about before COVID from one of the DOE contractors, and that really got me kind of interested in some of the history, background. I moved out here in 2007 and been with Bechtel since 2014. And really, because I'm a Richland resident, I think that's where my interest lies, being local here, wanting to help the HAB protect my family. So that's about me.
Thank you. So I don't know everyone's name, so I'll just let you kind of choose yourself as you go along.
My name is Rob Davis. I've been a member of the HAB since I think 2004. That's when I first joined. I first started working for the site out here back in 1975, I think it was. I took an internship with UNC at the INRIAC. And from there, I went to graduate school, got one degree, and then came back, worked for Westinghouse for a number of years. Then I, in fast reactor fuel development and spent fuel storage, helped work on some of the information that Westinghouse put together for the Waste Policy Act in 1982. So it was real important to me then. I had some commercial nuclear experience, mostly in construction, but certainly operations. And then I quit and went back to graduate school again and got a doctorate and came back here, started a company up in the Apple facility here, sold the company, and then I taught for a while at CBC and joined Bechtel on the finished once 2007 came, or 2006, I joined Bechtel to help push along the WTP because certainly in my perspective, immobilization is the most important thing we can do to our waste, is make it so it can't get into the human biosphere. So worked on the WTP for a number of years until COVID, and then was released with mission complete letter. And so right now my interest, I live in Pasco, Washington. I'm fully retired now. My interests I have a number of interests, but my big interest here on the board is again the immobilization of the waste. And I'm a acting chair of the Tank Waste Committee. And so I'm really looking forward to talking to people who'd like to join the Tank Waste Committee and volunteer for some deep dives into how we can fashion some advice. So thank you.
I'm John Smart. I'm representing the city of West Richland. I hold council position number 1. A little bit about my background. I've worked at the Pacific Northwest National Labs for 40 years now, and joined the nuclear chemistry group in 1982, and pretty much stuck with that, and then worked in the national security arena for all of those years. So my interest is primarily here representing the city of West Richland and our residents, and just learning more as a new member, and looking forward to working with them. Thank you.
I'm Tim Kovas. I work for the Washington State Tree Fruit Association. We're the trade association for the grower, packer, and marketers of apple, pears, and cherries in the state of Washington. We are approached when there are going to be some vacancies. I'm an at-large, or public, I guess, at-large position. So I got the assignment to join. Prior to working at the Tree Fruit Association, I spent about 10 years working for former Congressman Hastings. So I have a little bit of an understanding of the site, but haven't been out for probably 10 years or so. So excited to see what the progress has been in the last 10 years and hopefully provide some insight.
I'm Jeff Wyatt. I'm the new chair of the Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board. So my job is to help represent the interests of the state of Oregon on the Hanford cleanup. I've got more or less 40 years of experience in industry. I worked for Chevron both domestically and overseas. About 15 or 17 years of that was managing industrial Superfund and wrecker sites. So I have a pretty good background in environmental remediation. And I actually taught a course at UC Berkeley for a couple of years in environmental project management. So I've kind of coming from industry, and hopefully I can bring some of the perspective about how things are done out there in that world. And I did recently have a $500 million contract with Bechtel on a project in Kazakhstan. So I also know a lot about how contractors like Bechtel operate. So.
Good morning, I'm Dan Solitz. I'm the Elmwood delegate from the Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board. I'm the interim chair of the Public Involvement Committee, and I'll be making a pitch for you all to join that committee later on. I'm an ex-Navy NOOC. I joined the safeguards movement, the nuclear safeguards movement after I got out of the Navy in '71, and then was dormant for a few years and picked it up again when the President's Commission on America's Nuclear Future, the Rubin Commission. I got interested in that, and then I thought, well, maybe I should pay attention to what's going on at Hanford. I'm from Eugene, Oregon. And I've been on the Hanford board for the last 6 years, and my term is up November 16th, so we're looking for a new chair for the Public Involvement Committee. And I just really enjoy being here and taking a deep dive not only in public relations, but also the technical aspects of waste disposal.
Josh?
Well, my name is Josh Patnaud. I support Ruth on the HAB facilitation, and you'll probably see emails from me in the coming days.
Lacey?
Yes, so this is, I just want to really quick, this is Olivia and Jamie.
My name is Olivia Wilcox. I'm also with the HAB facilitation team. I've been in the Tri-Cities about 12 years and just with the HAB facilitation team for about a year and a half. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to get to support everybody. I think it's a really great thing.
I'm Jody Christensen, and I'm with the HAB facilitation team and RC engineering. I started out at the Hanford site when I was in high school, spent a couple decades out there, and then went to the subcontractor side. So I have RC engineering, which is part of the HAB facilitation team, and the HAB libraries at our office.
Yeah, thank you.
And then, sorry, can I just do it really quick? I'm just Lacey Mancius.
Oh, sorry.
I did introduce myself earlier, so yeah, but I've lived here for 20 years and I'm excited to be part of it.
Thank you, Lacey. So let's go to the television screen. Tom Galeotto. Are you muted?
Thanks, Jan. Yes, I can hear you, and I am here, at least virtually. I've been a member of the HAB since 2015. First as a public at large member, and then later and currently as a representative for TriDec on the HAB. Lived and worked in the Tri-City area for 45 years, raised our family here. And I joined because initially I felt that the HAB has a critical role in assisting for the Hanford cleanup. And I still feel that way. And I'm looking forward to continuing to work with the current members and now working with the newer members to continue that effort and get the best and the most effective cleanup we can. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Ruth Nicholson.
We will see how long my voice lasts. I'm Ruth Nicholson. I'm the HAB facilitator, and normally I'd be in the room with you, but I don't want to share what I have with you. I started work on Hanford issues in 1996. on the tank waste remediation system and comprehensive land use plan environmental impact statements. Was the board facilitator between 1998 and 2002. Went on to do some work with the Hanford Natural Resource Trustee Council. In English, that's a legal damage assessment between states, tribes, and the federal government. And came back to the HAB in July 2019. I've worked with environmental advisory boards for over 30 years. Gosh, I'm not that old. And I can tell you two things. One is I've never had a facilitation team as good as the four in the room with you today. And the thing that the HAB has that's different from an awful lot of advisory groups out there is there's actually a fundamental agreement in the room that we don't talk about a lot, but it's always there. In a lot of groups, delay is success when you're having political posturing and other things. In Hanford, everybody in the room knows that we're not done yet and that we want cleanup to progress. And so that fundamental agreement, when the discussions get tough about are we going to have enough money and are we cleaning up fast enough and do we have the technology to do it, that fundamental agreement, you can always take a step back and regroup because we do have that agreement in the room. A lot of groups don't have that, and it's something that's really special about the HAB.
Thank you, Ruth. Loanne Ayers, but before Loanne begins, I see at least 3 other names on the screen. If any of you want to talk, please turn on your camera if you have one and be prepared to speak. Go ahead, Loanne.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Loanne Ayers, and by day, I'm the Columbia Center Rotary member, business owner, and president of your local United Way. I just really embrace the first person's perspective of looking 7 generations, and I'm blessed that I'm 3 generations in the Mid-Columbia region. So have a ways to go, and that's really my vested interest in taking this amazing national resource and making it a resource for all people as fast and as clean and as quickly as we can. I worked with Pacific Northwest National Laboratory and some of the subcontractors for a decade in Ukraine and Russia in former nuclear cities, specifically a significant amount of time in Ukraine and near the Chernobyl site. I've been to the Chernobyl site many times. So recognize that this is a global challenge, but delighted to be able to learn more today. I came on during the pandemic, so I feel like I'm just starting.
Thank you, Loanne, and welcome. Is there anyone else on the screen who would like to introduce themselves? Very well. Go ahead, sir.
Jan, we've got one person who's only on the phone, so you wouldn't necessarily see them on screen.
I understand that, and I asked them to be ready to speak when I called them. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Good morning. My name is David Replod. I've been Tom Galliato's alternate representing TRIDEC on the HAB for 2 or 3 years now, I think. But my day job is working for TRIDEC. If you're not familiar, TRIDEC is the Tri-City Development Council. We're the economic development organization in the Tri-Cities, but really began by advocating for the federal missions in the Tri-Cities, both congressionally and with the Department of Energy, the AEC at the time. And so my job there is Vice President for Federal Programs, really working on the funding and policies needed to advance cleanup, to support the National Laboratory, to support other federal missions in the area. And so that's kind of the context that I'm here, but also my other job is Executive Director of Hanford Communities, which represents the local governments in the Tri-City area on Hanford cleanup issues. I've been working on Hanford issues professionally, I guess, in one sense or another since about 2008. I worked like Tim, I used to work on the congressional side. I worked for Senator Cantwell in her office here in the Tri-Cities, and so got to run around Central Washington with Tim quite a bit. But so I guess I'm involved with the HAB both kind of professionally, but also born and raised here in the Tri-Cities and raising my kids here in the Tri-Cities. And so Hanford cleanup and getting it done effectively is really important to me personally too. So I think that HAB can be an incredibly powerful voice in moving the cleanup forward, and look forward to working with everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, echo Dave's sentiments, been here and trying to make sure things get done. My name is Steve Anderson. I represent Franklin and Grant County. I was approached by Mike Karenko, who's a neighbor friend for Brad Peck, and retired leadership for an architectural engineering firm here, Meyer Architects and Engineers. We did subcontract support for the primes. Didn't have a deep dive into Hanford, but have always been very interested in its mission and raising a family, being from this area. Really like to see that come to fruition. So anything that I can do to make sure we offer dialogue and strong conversation toward good advice is of utmost interest to me.
Thank you.
I'm Ginger Wireman. I work for the Department of Ecology here and do communication support, and have been supporting the HAB for, 15 years in one capacity or another. And I do the bulk of our education and outreach for the Department of Ecology. So if you have a Rotary or Kiwanis group or a high school teacher that you would like to refer me to, I would love to find that out. So.
Hi, I'm Mia Burke. I represent Hanford Challenge on the board, and I started with Hanford Challenge as program manager about a year ago. And before that, I was actually a chef for 10 years and worked in Spain and New Zealand, and then in a Japanese restaurant in Portland, and got completely burned out of the chef lifestyle, and went back to school for international environmental policy and got a graduate degree in that, and then was looking for a challenge, and kind of by way of Columbia Riverkeeper found Hanford Challenge and found Hanford. And so now I deeply care about protecting workers and protecting the Columbia River and performing education and outreach about Hanford, and just keeping the conversation alive. So I'm happy to be here.
I'm Matt Hendrickson. I am a new employee with the Oregon Department of Energy. I will be replacing Jeff, if a few of you remember Jeff, as the alternate. I believe Max will still be the primary from Odo. Prior to this, I worked at the University of Oregon and the University of Wyoming as the hazardous materials manager, specialist and chemical safety officer, alternate RSO, radiation safety officer as well, so RSOs. I'll leave it to Tom, though, to say what our overarching mission, because I dare not step on that. Yeah.
My name is Chris Sutton. I've been on the HAB for 2 years. I'm the interim chair of the Budget and Contracts Committee. I started my career as a research scientist for a major oil company, a competitor of Chevron, CITGO, City Service, and made my way into the DOE arena and environmental remediation arena at a site called Fernald in Cincinnati. I was one of the team that started in '92, and we closed the door and turned out the lights at that DOE site in 2006. One of the few DOE sites that has been totally remediated and shut down. I started managing the analytical laboratory there and sample management office, but finished as a lead process engineer for a plant which routed all of our residual waste, kind of an automated plant, a mini version of DFLA. So I have a keen appreciation for operations and process control. Following Fernald, I went to the UK and worked at a site called Sellafield, which is the most nuclear contaminated site in the UK. And following that, after several years, I came here at Hanford. I retired from Hanford and I worked for CHPR Florida and CHPRC and retired in 2018. My reason for joining the HAB is that one of the highlights of my career has been part of a team which actually closed down and remediated a DOE site. And I felt that if I could join HAB, then maybe I could have some input to helping Hanford maybe become a little bit more efficient, a little bit more progress, a little faster, help the environment, help the people. But I'm interested in seeing Hanford accomplish what it can in terms of becoming another Fernald and shut down sooner rather than later.
Hi, everybody. Tom Cecilia. I work with Matt at the Oregon Department of Energy in the Nuclear Safety and Emergency Preparedness Division, and my official title is the Hanford Hydrogeologist. We represent the state of Oregon's interest on the board, and I am the chair of the River and Plateau Committee. I first learned about Hanford in the early 2000s and had just dropped out of college as a vocal performance music ed double major and decided to do something with my life that would actually make a physical improvement rather than just emotional improvement with music, and decided to learn how to clean things up. So I got a master's in hydrogeology. I'm passionate about soil remediation and groundwater treatment, and spent 10 years in consulting, designing systems and optimizing cleanups. I also taught a little bit at Clemson, taught some high school, some college football players how to identify rocks. And so if you ever have a question about remediation, I can at least steer you in the right direction. And I'll try to get you to join the River and Plateau Committee later today. So.
I'm Todd Myers. I'm the Environmental Director at the Washington Policy Center, which is a public policy think tank. I've worked in environmental policy for about 20 years, used to work at the Washington State Department of Natural Resources, currently sit on the Puget Sound Salmon Recovery Council. So I've dealt with a lot of environmental issues over the last 20 years. I was invited to be part of this because it sounds interesting. I have some knowledge of it, but I will admit that joining was a result of a little bit of a miscommunication. The nickname of the Montreal Canadiens hockey team is the Habs, so I thought I was coming to something. Now that I'm here, I'm really interested. So.
Good morning. My name is Rebecca Holland. I represent the Hanford Atomic Metal Trades Council. I am a worker on the site. I'm a health physics technologist. I've been on site for 36 years. Ruth, I am not that old either. So yeah, my passion is, of course, the health and safety of the workforce, the public, and the environment. I do chair the HSEP committee, so I'm going to be a bigger cheerleader than him, and I'm going to ask you guys to join the HSEP committee next month. We also
Would you say what HSEP means?
Health, Safety, Environmental Protection Committee. I currently work at the 324 building, which is kind of a hot topic. It's on our radar all the time here in the HAB. And so next month we will also have a tour. You'll get to see the full-scale mock-up of the 324 facility, and we're trying to get some people. I'm the lead for the airlock at the 324 facility, so we're going to try to get people to dress, undress, and go in and out of the mock-up airlock. So that's something that you're interested. Talk to me later, or Gary. Thank you.
I am Jessica Black. I'm here in partnership with Columbia River Keepers. I'm at Heritage University, which is just down the road in Toppenish. It's on the surrounded by the accommodation. I'm an environmental science and studies professor. I'm also the director for the Center for Indigenous Health, Culture, and the Environment. And I'm here, I think, to learn a lot about what's happening. And also, we have a lot of with our community, and we do a lot of outreach, K-12 STEM outreach. So I'm really interested in learning how we can interface with the kids in our area with what's going on here. So I'm really happy to learn.
Well, good morning. I'm Michelle Holt. I'm the Executive Director for the Benton Franklin Council of Governments. We're the regional planning agency for Benton and Franklin counties. I'm new to Tri-Cities. I've lived here for just under 2 years, but I came from Eastern Idaho and Idaho Falls. So much of my career has been nuclear adjacent. I grew up in Arco, Idaho, the first city in the world to be lit by atomic power, and Butte County is home to 75% of the Idaho National Laboratory Reservation. So advocacy and support for lab activities, as well as the importance of community relations between the lab and its home is very important to me. I worked as a contractor for a hot minute at the Advanced Mixed Waste Treatment Facility, tracking non-conformance drums. That was not my happy place. So for those of you who are very technical, that was not my happy world, but ensuring that the lab received adequate funding and support from the community was. So I was an executive director for the Idaho Falls Chamber of Commerce, and we went and did federal advocacy to ensure continued funding for lab facilities. I worked at the College of Eastern Idaho in workforce training and continuing education, and we actually contracted and provided environmental safety and health instructors to the national lab. So what I'm most excited about here at HAB is to learn more about the facilities here and our new home community and how I can be an advocate to support cleanup and also other related missions.
Jeff Mikesky, Inknash Wineksha Tina, Ikushiaku Wanek Lorraine James Contreras. Good morning, my Indian name is Tina and my English name is Lorraine James Contreras. I would be the program administrator for the Yakima Nation Environmental Restoration Waste Management Program. I took over the helm from Twy Russell Jim, who was the founder of our program there at the Yakima Nation, and he was instrumental in gaining a voice for the Yakima Nation. The Hanford Nuclear Reservation is 100% ceded territory of the Yakima Nation, and so our interest lies in protecting the cultural and natural resources out in the Hanford area. And we work through a cooperative agreement with Department of Energy to make sure that cleanup is being done to the best effect as possible. My role is coordinating between our Yakima Nation Tribal Council and Department of Energy through the program in carrying forward the work for the Yakima Nation and maintaining the important continuation of our history and our voice out at the Hanford site. Very happy to be here. It sounds like there's a lot of great minds in this room, and I am new to the Hanford Advisory Board. I've served the previous term, but due to COVID, it felt like I never really got engaged in working within. So very happy to be here and to get to know all of you.
My name's Alfonso Contreras. I am actually married to Lorene. I was volunteered. During COVID, I have an office at home, work out of my house, we have a small family business where we are involved with the tree food industry, and we work as a broker. We sell those apples, cherries, pears, and we export them, and we also ship them domestically. We work with multiple warehouses in the Yakima Valley to obtain fruit, and we either resell it or we sell it for them. Enough of that. My purpose being here is more personal, even though I represent part of America. I am their alternate vote. But it's more personal for me because I see a lack of education on how we live. Hispanics in the valley, Yakima Valley. Many of you have probably gone to wineries. Many of you have probably gone to breweries because they attract people for tourism, but they don't realize how they live and how Hanford affects their life. I am here to get to know some of you, hopefully all of you, and start an outreach. get people to come to the valley, get people to come see how we live, get people to see what is actually down there and out there. Because many people, just like on the west side, they don't leave Seattle. People in Seattle don't come to our valley to know how we live as people in Eastern Washington. So when they do their crazy laws, and we're driven by King County, it benefits them. It doesn't benefit us. Or their tax laws are based out of King County. Everything is based out of King County. But when it comes to affect us, it hurts us. So that same aspect I also see out of Tri-Cities, and I would like to someday invite you to come see how we live. Because even though I grew up in the valley, I left and went to school in Seattle, the University of Washington, came back, met Lorene. I was in cultural shock. I grew up across the street from the tribal reservation boundary, literally a block away. And I had no idea the massive cultural differences that were in the Yakima Nation, being Native, going to powwows, going to ceremonies, going to things that how they live. It was totally different to me, night and day. And I actually live in two different worlds now. I live in mine and I live in hers. And we've raised 4 kids. One happens to live here with their husband here in Pasco. We have 1 grandchild with them, and then we have 2 in Grandview, 2 boys. So we have 2 boys and 1 girl, but hopefully we would like to get you to, or I would like to get you in the valley to see how we live and how decisions coming from this board affect us. Thank you.
Thank you. And so for the last 4 people, we've heard from you. So would you please introduce
You bet,
yourself?
no problem. Pam Zimmerman, I'm the Hanford DOE Chief of Staff. I'm pleased to meet you all. I've lived here for over 45 years, and I am older than that, obviously, and I have worked here for over 33 years. But what I want to thank you all for is your passion for this community, and not just your role on the HAB, but to your passion for taking this information and educating others. Greatly appreciate your words. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And so if the remaining 3 have any other kind of personal remarks that they want to make, let's do that now before we go on to the screen one more time.
Hey, I'll take that opportunity. So I'm not from here originally, from Idaho. We'll probably connect later. Turn to this about some potatoes or something. But I too am a product of the military, but Coast Guard aviation, so non-nuclear. When I retired from the service, I went to work at the Umatilla Chemical Weapons Facility, and then found myself out here at the Hanford site, and then later with DOE. What's common amongst all of the things that I've done in my professional life is that I like to work on things that make a difference, make a positive difference to this country, to the people who live here. And quite frankly, if it doesn't, I can't stay with it very long. I get bored and have to move on to something else. I don't know what that'll be later in life, but right now I'm here with you. I'm grateful for this opportunity. A tremendous amount of technical expertise here, a tremendous amount of passion for outreach, which intrigues me considerably, because that's you'll hear more about that in the future. So thank you again for the opportunity to be with you, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you.
I'll go ahead and take the opportunity to tell you a little bit more about myself really quick. I am from here. I was born and raised here, 3rd generation to work here, raised our family here. Hanford cleanup's important to me. And the one thing I heard was the diverse voices and perspectives and the places you all are coming from. And that is so important. And that is the big value that really helps and makes the cleanup and the advice better, is hearing all those voices And I just want to thank you for being willing to share. It's critical. Thank you.
Nice recap, very nice. So before we take a break, let's go back to the screen one more time for people who are on the call, whether you're on Teams or whether you're on the telephone. Please unmute yourself if you like to speak. Very well then. So I think we're right at break time. Is that right, Lacey?
Yes.
So how long do we have scheduled for a break?
We have until 9:15.
Very good. So let's.
If anybody needs to use the restroom at the end of the hall.
This is Jerry Griffin.
Perfect.
You
So,
know, what we have is a group here that are going to be leading the bus tour this afternoon, and they're here now to kind of get oriented to all of you. So Jerry, go ahead.
great, thank you very much. My name is Jerry Griffin, and this is what a mostly retired Hanford worker looks like. I got here in 1980, and I think I'm a tour guide because as we go around this afternoon, we pass most of the facilities, I'll say, I used to work there. Here's what they did, and here's what we're doing now to clean up. So it's a pleasure to be with you. My background is I graduated from the Naval Academy in Annapolis in 1980 with a degree in physics and math. Served on nuclear submarines, came to Hanford in 1980 when I got out. It was 75 when I graduated. And then I worked here, retired in 2015 mostly, but I've done some consulting work, mostly readiness review team lead. So that's kind of my background. And with that, we'll get started. This presentation, when I was asked to cover, and I'll get out of the way so you can see. When I was asked to do history, I already confessed I'm a scientist, so history is not what I do. But this presentation.
Sorry, Jerry, working on technical.
That's okay.
We still got this one.
I'm a tech at our church, and I know what can go wrong in tech. So
Yeah, sorry, Jerry, thank you, thanks.
No sweat. So this presentation was actually prepared for the American Empress. That's the sternwheeler that comes into town. They go from Portland to Lewiston and back, every week. And this was one of their excursions. So when I was asked to do history, I thought about this presentation, which has been released for the public. And it's really fascinating because it's chock full of really old pictures, back from the 40s. So it's a privilege to be able to share that with you. So let's go to the next slide. So this is probably a little bit familiar to you. This is the Hanford site as it existed way back. And so the next slide will drop some red on that. That was the portion of the site that was determined to be a security buffer area. Okay, so the white section is what we think of today as Hanford. The red, during the 40s, that was an area that was also evacuated from folks, and we'll talk about those two groups here in a second, as a security area. So as an old military guy, that makes a ton of sense to me that you have this buffer area between where the public can access. Now, what you'll notice is 240 runs right through the middle of that. So there was a period of time where Route 240 was actually closed to public transit. All right, this is a really busy slide. I'm not going to cover all the details. Its point is that the science that was used in the Manhattan Project, if you go all the way back, Chadwick discovered the neutron in 1932. But Fermi and his pile of demonstrating a self-sustaining chain reaction was in 1942. And Seaborg and Macmillan discovered plutonium about the same time. So we started construction here in 1943. So with a science a little more than a year old. Now today what we do is we start in the lab and then we build the next state and we go through several iterations before we wind up with full deployment. The Manhattan Project went from science that was less than 2 years old and they were online in about 2.5. So independent of what we may think about the product, the achievement itself is the reason that B reactor is a National Historic Site, just because of that accomplishment. Next slide. All right, so why the Manhattan Project? Well, we had a lot of scientists immigrate, really escape from Europe under the oppression of Adolf Hitler. And so a lot of those scientists came to the United States and they made us aware of the work that the Germans were doing with nuclear fission, trying to develop a super weapon. So that was one of the reasons. Then we talk about Einstein's letter to Roosevelt. It actually
Einstein didn't write the letter, he signed it. Leo Szilard, who was a scientist from Europe, he came over fully aware of that, but he also was aware that nobody had ever heard of him, but everybody had heard of Einstein. So he wrote the letter saying we should do this work, and then Einstein signed it so that Roosevelt would read it. Now, initially, when Roosevelt read that letter, he appropriated a few $1,000s to research. But in 1941, next slide, please. In 1941, the Pearl Harbor event really changed his whole perspective. World War I was a war fought elsewhere, but when Pearl Harbor occurred, now all of a sudden the homeland was threatened, and that got Roosevelt's attention. And at that point, he formed what we call the Manhattan Engineering District in August of 1942. Now, the Manhattan Project, Manhattan Engineering District, its name originates because General Groves, who was put in charge of that project, was responsible for the 8th Army Corps of Engineers District, headquartered in Manhattan, New York. So we military folks love to be able to say stuff out loud that's classified, that doesn't reveal anything. So they named it the Manhattan Project because it originated a guy from that deal. Now, interestingly, Groves was a colonel when they asked him, and he said, no way. And the reason for that was he understood that a colonel would have absolutely no respect with a bunch of scientists. You know, one of my jobs was the ops manager at 222S, so I can resonate with that. Scientists, you know, kind of do their own thing, and they don't really like a bunch of military guys telling them what to do. So what Groves said is, if you make me a general, I'll do it. And so the rest, as they say, is history. And so we think of General Groves, and that's how that came to be. Next slide, please. All right, so one of the things that the scientists encouraged Roosevelt to do was not put all our eggs in one basket. Basically, the Germans were looking to do fission so they could breed plutonium. But what the scientists said, we can also look to separating the two isotopes, the predominant isotopes of uranium, uranium-235 and 238, and have as pure a 235 as we can get to make a weapon out of that. And so that's why we had various sites across the US. So next slide. So Oak Ridge was where they were doing the uranium separation, and they built a small reactor. It was scaled up of the Chicago Pile 1 that Fermi did demonstration of self-sustaining chain reaction. X10 is the name of it, and was a kilowatt size reactor stepped up from the 100-watt CP1. And they readily determined that that was not going to breed plutonium at any rate that was possible, so they went looking for another location. They also chose, next slide please, Los Alamos as a location that they were going to collect this material and make the weapons. In fact, as a scientist, I've read a lot of history that has a scientific flavor. There's a book called Project Y, and I can't remember the name of the author, that describes the challenges that went on at Los Alamos. And it turned out that the two production sites were pretty mature, 2-year-old science. The guys at Los Alamos were trying to, invent this as the product was being created. It's a fascinating story. So that work went on at Los Alamos, and then they selected up here at Richland for the location for the Hanford works. Next slide, please. So in the early 1940s, Glenn Seaborg and Edwin McMillan discovered plutonium. Now, I can't explain why we physicists do what we do, but one day they got the idea, let's bombard uranium with neutrons. I don't know why they came up with that, but what they discovered was 2 new elements were formed when they did that. Okay, and they got to name them. And so because they started with uranium, they took the next planet, Neptune, and named the first element Neptunium, and the next one after that, plutonium. That's where the name came from. Now, the slide shows Dr. Glenn Seaborg, but Edwin McMillan's sons were on one of the B reactor tours I gave a few years ago, and they asked me why my father doesn't get more billing for the discovery of plutonium. And if you look it up on the Nobel Prize, they both won the prize. So I feel like I'm sharing McMillan's name. The reason he doesn't get named, he got reassigned. After they had isolated Neptunium, got reassigned because he was a scary smart guy, and he knew radar as well, and so he got assigned to a radar project while Seaborg finished the separation of plutonium. So that was at the University of California in Berkeley. This is just a great kind of artist rendition of Fermi's CP1, the critical pile number 1. The thing that's interesting to me about that is his laboratory was a squash court underneath the football stadium stands at the University of Chicago. That's the area that they gave him to work in. And so what's depicted there, the guys, with the controls, they're actually up on the mezzanine. If you've ever been into a squash court, there's a mezzanine where you can watch. That's where the controls were. So it's really, an excellent picture of what it looked like. And literally, it was a pile of graphite and the uranium. That's what that was, CP1. Next, please. All right. So when they determined they needed another site besides Oak Ridge, these were the siting criteria. And I'm not going to read through all of this, but to basically give you the context of what they were looking for. They didn't really know. They had started with this very small pile that they were able to do a self-sustaining chain reaction in. What they didn't know is, are they going to be able to control that, and what kind of environmental impacts that might have. So the siting criteria basically boils down, they wanted an area that was completely isolated, uninhabited if they could find it, with lots of cold flowing water, lots of available electrical power, very remote, lots of gravel for aggregate for concrete, so they have to bring it in. And so if you go to the next slide, this is again the folklore. When Colonel Matthias, who General Groves assigned to go find this site, what is rumored to be what he said when he flew over, and this was the view of what he saw, this is it. Right? That's what he saw, and it was everything they wanted. The Columbia River runs through here. Grand Coulee Dam had just been finished. The sand and gravel is prevalent, and the population density was extremely low, but not zero. And the idea is that homeland had been threatened, and so they wanted to find an area that if they had to sacrifice that area, they were willing to do it for the preservation of the country. All right. Well, today we know we're trying to recover that part, and that's why we're all here and what you all are involved in. Next slide. Now, there were two groups of people that lived here. There were the white settlers, and it was predominantly people who were here for agriculture. This land, and we'll talk more about this as we go on the tour this afternoon, this land, our topsoil, I describe it as having been imported from Montana. Okay, so we'll talk about the Missoula floods and the Ice Age when we're on the bus. But when they saw the topsoil, the original settlers, what they realized, it's really rich. If you water it, you can grow anything. And so the agriculture was what brought people here to the Hanford town site and the White Bluffs town site, which we will show you on the tour. We're going to drive by there and you'll see the two remaining buildings up there. So here's a picture from 1922. So this is 20 years before the Manhattan Project, showing the guys out there in their orchards. And in fact, as we go out, any place you see trees, those are man-planted. They are not indigenous. And you'll see some of those very trees in that picture. Next slide. They also grew other crops like corn and so on. And all of these people, there was about 1,500 people in the town of White Bluffs, Hanford, and the village of Richland. So 1,500 settlers that needed to be moved. Now, I've already confessed I'm a Navy guy. And so this was the Army that was responsible for that. Any Army vets in the room? Oh, we got one. Okay, awesome. So I always try to represent the Army in the best possible light. And so here's how they went about it. They sent letters to the settlers and they said, here's the deal. We're going to show up and we're going to offer you non-negotiably a price for your property, and we're going to give you 60 days to vacate. And I've done these tours for almost 20 years, off and on, the cleanup tours. And several years ago, a lady was on my bus. And when I shared that, she goes, Jerry, that's mostly right. But in my case, she was a child at the time. They gave our family 2 weeks to evacuate. So I've always described that the people who were here that were displaced were really the first casualties of the Hanford site. The environment was a casualty after production started. But those 1,500 people, real life people, were asked, not asked, but directed to leave. Next slide, please. All right, so, and if you hit the next one. So basically what they did was they took this area surrounded by that sort of kidney-shaped unit. And what this slide is really trying to depict is there are, as you can see, a number of landmarks on those, and that represents sacred sites for the Native Americans. In particular, the Gable Mountain is a sacred site, Rattlesnake Mountain is, and we'll also drive by an area called Mulai Mulai, which I'll show you, which was also a sacred site, which the Native Americans were authorized access to for perpetuity in the treaty of, I believe it was 1869. Now, I'm from Arizona originally, and the Native Americans there, their treaties with the US government is to give them reservations, to give them land. But here, in this region, the treaty said forever, we're going to give you access to the fishing rights along the Columbia River and the sacred sites and hunting and fishing. So when the Manhattan Project came in here, they then violated that treaty, and that is still a point of contention that, you know, we're trying to restore access. So the sacred sites within that kidney-shaped area, the Native Americans do have badged members of the tribes that do come in and use those sacred sites today. That's been restored. Next slide, please. All right, so White Bluffs, Hanford, and the Richland Village are the three areas where the white settlers were, and you can see where they were on the map. And then the Native Americans had those sacred sites. All right, so this is a great picture of from 1861. It was established, the White Bluffs town site, and it was a ferry landing. Okay, so we're all familiar probably with the 1849, you know, gold rush in California. Well, later in the 1860s, there was a gold rush to Canada. And so White Bluffs was actually a ferry landing that got people across the Columbia River headed north to be prospectors, just like the 49ers heading to California. These folks came here, and that was what initially established the White Bluffs area, and then the farmers came in and also did the agriculture. Next, please. This is a great picture of the Hanford town site. This was a travel brochure picture. Come visit Hanford, see our lovely hotel. I just love this picture because it just shows how stark this area was. So here's all these people that have shown up and, you know, floated up the river because they're headed to the Hanford Hotel. The Hanford Hotel is no longer there, but that's a great picture of that. This shows a family in the Homestead area in the village of Richland. Now, the reason we show this picture is because if you want to go to the cemetery just north of Williams in Richland, there's an old cemetery that used to be outside of just north of the village of Richland. And the Ochiltree family, we actually found their grave. So it's a real life picture of real life people. And I just look at that and see, okay, so that's the condition that the folks were living in what is now Richland back in 1910. Next, please. Now, the Native Americans were the other groups that was affected. They not only lost the fishing and the sacred sites, but they had to move out of areas where they were living. And this is a representative of the Yakima and the Colvilles. Other tribes involved are the Wanapum is one of the predominant areas. And the next slide, we'll talk about one of those leaders. So Puck Hayatut was the chief of the Wanapum tribe at that time. Now, his anglicized name is Johnny Buck. I don't know how you get from Puck Hayatut to Johnny Buck, but it's easier to pronounce, certainly. Now, Johnny Buck and Colonel Matthias became friends. And so Matthias, you know, felt really bad about, you know, having to evacuate them from their areas. So during construction, Matthias arranged for escorts to bring the Native Americans on so they could fish, so they could hunt, and they could go to their sacred sites. But then, next slide, when that sign went up, it went up when they started production. So at that point, the Native Americans no longer had access to the site. Now, Johnny Buck's granddaughter gave all of the B reactor docents a tour through the Wanapum Cultural Center just a couple of years ago. And you talk about fascinating history, just incredible. And to think about 2 generations later, that family is still here. So it begins to be, you know, the pictures are less personal than when you've met Johnny Buck's granddaughter. It's just, these are real people who were affected by that coming in. Next slide, please. All right, so what brought the people here was 2 major things. And the demographics is interesting to kind of lay the context for it. So today we don't have draft and you know, conscripted people. My draft number was 23 for the Vietnam War, so I'm familiar with what that all involves. But we don't have that kind of, you know, force people going into the military. But in World War II, it certainly did. And so as a result, all of the younger men were serving overseas in the military. So when the Manhattan Project started, then they were looking for workers. The only people left to recruit was older folks. But meanwhile, the scientists, they were younger. So the workforce was essentially upside down. The supervision, those who were in the know, were younger than the workforce that they were supervising. And that's just not normal. Normally you enter and you progress up in management, but that's not the way that worked. In addition to that, there was great secrecy. General Groves was a fanatic for security. And so he not only, was everything classified, but it was also highly compartmented. And so very few people actually involved in the Hanford project knew the whole story, and the workers did. So what attracted them to come in like that? Two things: excellent pay, because we're during a wartime, and it was just really difficult to make ends meet, and food. Food was rationed during World War II. So they could come here, the workers could come here, get paid really well, and they could get all the food they wanted, stuff they couldn't get if they were outside. That's what attracted them. Now, interestingly, at any given time, the workforce peaked at around 50,000 people, but they interviewed and hired 150,000. And the reason for that is because the turnover was extremely high, and we'll get to that in a second. Next slide. All right, so they built a construction camp at the Hanford town site, and then later up at White Bluffs as well. And so when we're talking about campsites, you might picture today's RV, and that's not what we're talking. We're talking about initially tents that they lived in, right? And so they built this thing. It was 3 miles by 2 miles long, that number of buildings. But what's interesting to me, it's the 4th largest city in Washington at that time because of the population. It had its own zip code. That's how big this camp was, this construction camp inside. So this is a picture of further down the road from the initial, and it's maybe hard to see if you're too far from the screen. But after the tents, then they built some Quonset huts and eventually brought in some trailers. So the trailers were for the married folks. And I can't imagine, telling my wife, we're going to go out and we're going to live in the desert and you're going to sit in this little tiny trailer. And if you want to see one, go to the Hanford Reach. They actually have one of those trailers right there at the Reach that you can peer into and see that's what those people lived in. Next slide. This is then another picture of the hutments that they built. So they realized that initially they weren't sure, let's put a lot of resources into these construction camps. But as time went on and as attrition went up, they started to build more because the Army is very sensitive to people's living conditions. Right, next slide, please. This is the inside of one of those Quonset huts. And what I love to show about this is that you'll notice that each person gets that, really scratchy blanket. They get a nice, covered closet to put their stuff in. Then everyone is issued an ashtray. It's just a different time. That's the way things were. And that is an actual picture of the inside. And so they had coal to heat. And in the summer, there was no such thing as air conditioning, which also contributed to the attrition. So just a little bit about attrition. So here's what would happen. For how many people actually just live in this area? Right here, so a few of you, right? So if you live here, we get wind and it blows from west to east. The first thing you do when you do a construction project is you come in and you scorch the earth, right? You just take the topsoil and you level things out so you can build your stuff. So the combination of having scraped the topsoil, disturbed it, and high winds creates a lot of dust. So what would happen is when the wind would blow really bad, there'd be this incredibly horrible dust storm that would come up. And the next morning, there would be a line at the hut for the HR, the human relations folks, all right, personnel building. And the line was for people that wanted to quit. Right, next slide. Okay, this is the mess hall early in the presentation. So they knew that the personnel people caught on to the fact that when the wind blows like that, the next morning there's going to be this long line. And they called those winds the termination winds as a result of that. So later on, they built these really nice mess halls, and a couple of those really remind me of the one at Bancroft Hall at the Naval Academy. It's the same shape. It's just the way military builds. And the next picture is the inside of a mess hall inside. Okay, that's what it looks like. And the way the military works is they feed you family style. So they, send the platters down, and when your platter's empty, you just hold it up and somebody comes and replaces it. Exact same thing, the way that worked. And in the upper right-hand corner is a meal ticket. Meal ticket costs 67 cents a day, and that got you 3 meals, all you could eat. That was what really attracted guys to come here. 67 cents. Now, 67 cents in 1943 and 4 is worth a lot more than 67 cents is today, but still, that was a darn good deal, and that's how they did it. And you can see how crowded that is. It's just incredible. Next slide. That's what the termination wins look like. So all the good stuff, they started building those the hutments and all that. That's what a termination wind looked like. And the next morning, they'd have a lot of people line up to just say, that's it, I'm done, I'm out of here. And that's why it took 150,000 people to build the site, and when 50,000 was the normal level of the workforce. All right. So the other thing that the DuPont company did was they realized, all right, this construction camp, which we won't be able to show you today because it's gone. And so the Army came in, they built all that stuff. That's why the pictures are so great. What you're going to see today is just restored, the sagebrush and the natural look of things. The Army cleared out all of the stuff they did, but DuPont recognized that they were bringing in a bunch of people to run these facilities. So just like things are today, the folks who construct, they're kind of nomads, right? They go to one place and they build a thing, and then they go to the next place and they build that, and they tend to move around a lot. But DuPont recognized that the operators of these facilities, they're going to live here. And so what they did was they convinced General Groves, we need to build a really nice city. Build a city. Now they've displaced everybody out of the village of Richland, but what they did was they got a guy from Spokane, Gustav Pearson. Right, so Gustav was an architect, and he had 3 or 4 architects working with him up in Spokane. And so Groves goes to him and says, all right, here's what I need you to do. I need you to design me a city, right? All the houses, and I want them to be really high quality. This isn't going to be your standard government housing, no offense to the military housing, the way that's done. He says, I want this to be really class housing that gets built, and I want you to do that. And Gustav said, no, I'm busy. He says, no, you don't understand. This is what you're going to do. It's important for national security. And he gave him 30 days to deliver the first design and start construction on the first house. Now, we lovingly refer to those houses here. Gustav didn't have time to name them, so he just assigned letters to them. Each style house had a letter, and so today we refer to those as the alphabet houses. And so if you go out on Stevens and Jadwin, north part of town, those houses are still being occupied. They were really high quality, and people are living in them, and they've renovated them and made really nice places to live out of them. And it's amazing to see a house built back in the 40s that still is a really high quality house. So DuPont did a really nice job. This is a picture then of Richland in the mid 40s. So they built these houses, and one of the things Groves told Pearson to do, he says, I don't want this to look like the standard military house, where you've got roads running north and south and roads running east and west. I want them to be kind of curved. I don't want all the houses to be sitting perpendicular to the road. So if you drive down on Jadwin and Stevens, what you'll see are some little curved sections out where the houses are in a kind of an arc around there. And that, again, that was Groves. He says, I want not only that, but I don't want any fences. So I want lots of open space, and I want people to be able to gather. So it's a little bit sad to drive along there and see all the fences that have been put up. But Groves was into that level of detail with the housing. And so what you can see is the way and you can see that it's not all in straight lines, and that was Groves' idea. Next picture. So at the time then, at the end of the Hanford project, this is what it cost, $330 million. They built 554 residential buildings and all of that. Now, part of the folklore that I love to share is a plutonium nitrate that was produced in T plant. So the uranium that had been loaded in the reactors, and we'll talk more about that as we're out on site, was sent down to the 200 area, dissolved, and the plutonium extracted. The product was plutonium nitrate. Plutonium nitrate was sent to Los Alamos to be converted into plutonium metal and then put into the still classified shapes for the nuclear weapon. So the original plutonium nitrate that was taken to Los Alamos was hand carried. And so plutonium is an alpha emitter. It's really easy to shield that. It's not any kind of a hazard from that standpoint. But today, having overseen as director of safeguards a lot of the inventory of PFP material when we shipped it to Savannah River and the Office of Secure Transport, it's hard for me to picture the difference between the way we transport that material today and the way they did. Now, the reason I'm talking about that on this slide was that this is one of those stories that associated with that time. The very first shipment, they're hand carrying in like a briefcase looking thing. And the guy from Los Alamos goes to Los Angeles and the guy from Hanford goes to Los Angeles, and they meet and do this handoff. And so the guy from Hanford asked the guy from Los Alamos, now, do you have your own, personal sleeper car arranged for you? And he goes, no, we decided to save a little money. I'm just going to sit, with the general public. And so he asked him, do you have any idea how much this material is worth? And the guy said, I got no idea. The end is 330 million. But at that time, he says, well, this is worth $250 million. Because that was the cost of Hanford up to that point. At that point, the guy goes back into the station, gets a private train car, and goes from there. And there's just tons of stories like that historically about this time. But that's the total spend. So B reactor was the first plant that was started up. I'd love to be able to show what one of those looks like, because none of those sites look like that today. When we're out on site, all the ancillary buildings around are gone. Obviously, the steam plants aren't running, any of that kind of thing. So that's really a great picture to show what B reactor did. Now, during Manhattan Project, DuPont was chosen as the contractor by General Groves because of their focus on safety. And DuPont was very reluctant to take that job because in World War I, they had gotten really a bad rap for being the provider of explosives for the military during World War I. And they got kind of the name as the harbingers of death. So when Groves came to him and said, I want you to be the architect, engineer, and operator for this Hanford site, they said, no, I don't want to have anything to do with that. And so Groves was hard over on wanting them to do it because of their focus on safety. So what they negotiated is, we will do that job as long as we don't make a profit. Okay, because we don't want that same result that we got from World War I. Well, you can't do any work for the government and not make a profit. And so they settled on a fee of $1. That's what they were going to do this whole job for, $300 million worth of construction for $1. Well, when they were all done with the project, when all the accounting was done, it came out that they had underrun, and so they got awarded 67 cents. Okay, that's the way it was. Now, the rest of the story is, there was a men's group, and I think it was the Goodfellows, but I'm not sure, in Pasco, that got wind of this, that, DuPont did not get the full dollar that they were agreed to. So 33 of their members gave a penny each to give to DuPont to make them whole. So they made $1 at the end. Now, DuPont's focus on safety was such that at the time, and it's fascinating to me to realize that they were building these facilities as they were designing them. And so the initial premise, when I first heard that the first 3 reactors built in Hanford were B, D, and F, I really kind of wondered a little bit about the Army's understanding of the alphabet. But it turned out there was a really good explanation for that. Their focus on safety was, we're going to have 6 corridors of where the reactors are going to be, safety corridors, A through F. When the design was finalized enough, before they had broken ground everywhere, they realized that they only needed 3 reactors. So they skipped A because it was closest to the public, and they built at B. And then for safety, they skipped C and built at D. And then they skipped E and built F. So when we're on the site out there today, then I'll show you B, D, DR, and F, and then H and C that were built, and N that were built during the Cold War. Next slide, please. All right, so that Hanford then project overall had 3 main parts to it. The first one is, next slide, please, is the 300 area. That's where fuel fabrication was. So this is where the uranium, and it was natural uranium. So the abundance of uranium-235, which is the isotope that fissions in natural uranium, is 0.707%, less than 1%. So that's why the B reactor is so big. is because the actual fissile material in the fuel is very, very low percentage, right? Once the fuel is fabricated, it was sent to the 100 areas, and the 100 areas are where the reactors are, and they were located there because they're right next to the river, and they brought the water in, and it's a single pass design. So the water, is brought in, it's filtered, it runs through the reactor, and then it's put in a storage basin to allow it to cool a little bit and discharge back to the river. And that's the way they did things in those days. The next area it went to then is the plateau, the 200 areas. Now today, we're gonna go visit all of those on our route. And a lot of what I will not be showing you in the 300 area is all of those facilities are remediated. So that's a success story. And obviously we started closest to town, and those facilities were cleaner than what we're gonna deal with on the plateau. All right, next. That is the end. So are there any questions that anyone has? I know I talked really fast because I don't want to waste your time, and Susan is going to give Hanford Advisory Board history in just a minute. Are there any questions about the history? Yes, sir.
Well, you answered the question that I always was wondering about, is why DuPont didn't renew their contract. So I appreciate that.
Yes.
And the other question I have is, are you familiar with the Spikes report that came out right after the 1945 describing the process?
I've read a lot, but not that particular report.
The nuclear power school curriculum, I think, was taken from that. It's very detailed on what they went through to actually produce the reactor that functioned.
Yes, yes. The early documents are fascinating, and many of them were declassified. And I have several, where the classification is blanked out and then it says unclassified.
This is a report to the public. There's no reduction. Report to the public of what they did, and how they went about doing it,
right,
and the science behind it.
And in fact, today, what's left that's classified are the actual production rates. I can share, this freaks me out a little bit as a former weapons officer on a submarine, but it's a 1/2 pound plutonium yield for every ton of plutonium uranium loaded into the reactor. And that, from a cleanup standpoint, explains why the tanks are so full, because the yield is extremely low. And then each device, each weapon, had approximately 8 pounds of plutonium in it. So 16 tons of uranium to produce each weapon, and that explains the 56 million gallons of liquid waste. But those early documents are really fascinating. They're very open in what they're sharing, but so the details, because this is just publicly available science that they're deploying, so they felt free to write about it, but the production rates and the shapes of the weapon parts, those were classified and remain classified today. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
We were always told that the Chicago pile was the A reactor, and this was B reactor, because of the A, B, and that. And you're saying it's a little different.
The Chicago reactor was actually named CP1.
Right.
Again, folklore, it just makes sense. Well, the first one is A, and the next one would be B, but X10 is in the middle. So see, that doesn't really work either. So Fermi's reactor, he named it Chicago Pile 1, or Critical Pile 1. And then X10 at Oak Ridge, and then B, D, and F. And they were all built during the same, several months, but B came online first, and that's why it gets so much press. But B, D, and F were the first three.
I got to work with a fellow named Claude Sullivan, who was there at the startup of the B reactor.
Yeah.
And Fermi would have a code name, Mr. Farmer.
Mr. Farmer.
Would come to town, and everybody knew Mr. Farmer's in town.
Yes.
And then they had to clear the room and do all their calculations on slide rules. Yeah.
And it's fascinating that how little they knew. Every reactor operator today has to explain the xenon effect, but they didn't know. So they built B reactor with the idea that 1,500 process tubes was plenty. And the engineers, this is painful for a scientist to share this because the engineers were right. But the engineers just said, what's your contingency if you're wrong? And of course, scientists are never wrong. And Fermi and Crawford Greenwald, who was the head engineer for DuPont, argued in front of Groves and eventually convinced him they wanted 500 more tubes just for contingency. Well, Fermi said, I don't need them. So they didn't fuel them. they didn't connect the cooling water to them. And there's 2004, just the way the geometry worked out. So when they observed this xenon shutdown early on in the first startups, when they redid the calculations, they determined they needed 500 more tubes. But they lost about a month while they had to shut down and reconnect, or actually connect the cooling water to those other 504 tubes, and then have enough margin to override the xenon effect. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Is there one or two books you would recommend?
Great question. So I love the Project-wide book because it's just really fascinating how much they didn't know about how to use the material from Oak Ridge, and they were scurrying at the end. Another really good one is On the Home Front by Michelle Gerber, and she was the Hanford historian. And what I really like about that is it's written in kind of layman's terms. It's really good history. And she goes into a lot of the human elements of it. So Michelle Gerber's book, On the Home Front. And then if you want more of the technical, The Making of the Atomic Bomb by Richard Rhodes is really excellent. And then I just finished one called The First War of Physics. And I can't remember who wrote that, but it's also very fascinating, and it describes a lot about our, sabotaging the heavy water that the Germans were trying to use. So those are some really excellent books. There's a ton of them out there, but those three, and one more is called The Uranium People, and it's written by Leona Woods Marshall. So she was a graduate student assistant to Fermi, and she was actually the one who invented the compensating ion chamber to measure reactor power, because you can't measure a neutron directly. It doesn't have a charge. And so there's now a middle school out where I live in West Richland named after her. And I just think that's fascinating, because in that era, women just didn't participate in that, but she's written a book, and it talks about the CP1's initial crit, and they wanted to have a wine, celebration, and they didn't have any wine glasses, so they drank out of, paper cups. It's just full of stories like that. So those are all really excellent resources. Any other questions? And then Susan is on right now, so I guess I'll cut off questions, but we'll be together for 3.5 hours this afternoon. You can ask tons of questions on the bus. So Susan.
Hi, my name is Susan Leckband. You heard my name before. I was a member of the Hanford Advisory Board from 1996 until last June. And 18 of those years I served as your chair or vice chair in leadership positions. And the reason that I actually applied to be on the Hanford Advisory Board, I started work at Hanford in 1988. We moved out here in the early 80s. And in 1994, there were a series of events around the Tri-Cities, 50th anniversary of Hanford events. And one of those events was a recreation of those mess hall dinners that you saw pictures of. And I volunteered I was working at Hanford, but I volunteered to help at those mess hall dinners. And I got to meet several of the folks who had been here during the construction days and during World War II. And I was and I get goosebumps talking about it. I was so struck by their patriotism and their dedication. And because it was during the war, many of those people who came out here were older at that time because the younger men had been drafted. So they were the experts in their fields, the expert journeymen in building things. They had no idea what they were building at the time at the reactors, at B reactor. But they wanted to do their part for their country. And it really struck me, and just at that time, there came a position available as a non-union, non-management representative for the Hanford Advisory Board. I applied, and interestingly enough, the DOE liaison didn't think I was suitable because I don't have a college degree, but EPA and ecology folks determined that they thought I would be appropriate, and so I served on the board a lot of years. And part of the reason I stayed is I absolutely believe in public engagement and I think that we can all work together, and I was so enthralled by the Hanford Advisory Board processes and how it was a consensus board. Can you imagine every one of you around the table saying, yes, I want to do that, saying exactly the same thing? Do you know how hard it is to get there? Because you represent interests. But the Hanford Advisory Board was a first, as lots of other firsts at Hanford. The other firsts include the Tri-Party Agreement, which is an agreement between the U.S. Department of Energy, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and the Washington State Department of Ecology. It was signed in 1989 by representatives from all of those organizations. And it was the first agreement in the country that laid out how a federal facility was going to be cleaned up under state and federal environmental laws. Before the TPA was signed, there were lots of lawsuits from public interest groups, from all kinds of places against the department, against the federal government, because of something that they were concerned about at Hanford. Even after the agreement was signed, there were still lots of lawsuits because people didn't understand, and the security at the Hanford site was so tight for so many years that the kind of transparency needed to help people understand what was going on wasn't there. I can remember when I worked on site, if you left in the middle of the day for some reason, you had to take your badge off or you had to hide it under your clothes. You couldn't even show that you had a badge that worked at the site. The security was very tight. At that time, people from across the Northwest region, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, they came together because they valued Hanford cleanup. They wanted it done.
Something went wrong. Please try again.
Let me try again. There were some first tries at a kind of collaboration to help support the path forward to cleanup. The Tank Waste Task Force had members of the public, had intellectuals, members from the site, and they talked about how to clean up the tank waste because that is the largest volume of waste that we needed to look at the time, and was deemed even at that time one of the highest risks. Then the Future Site Uses Working Group, again, another kind of collaborative group, but these were temporary groups. And the people who were involved in these, they were focused on specific parts of Hanford, but they were temporary, and they realized that a more permanent, more encompassing organization was needed to understand Hanford cleanup issues and to advise the TPA agencies on Hanford cleanup. The Keystone Center was invited to help facilitate a discussion and gather ideas about how to create a more permanent group to work together to develop Hanford cleanup advice. That facilitated discussion worked so well that the Washington State Department of Ecology agreed to fold its own advisory group. They had their own citizen advisory group for Hanford issues at that time. And because they would be allowed to participate in the Hanford Advisory Board, they sunset their board in order to move things forward in a more inclusive manner. The Hanford Advisory Board was the first citizen advisory board associated with one of the Superfund sites across the USI. And you heard Jerry refer to Fernald and some other sites, and at this point, there are, I think, 7 other sites, sister sites, that have advisory boards. With the inclusive makeup of the Hanford Advisory Board, there were, surprisingly, fewer and fewer lawsuits because people understood what was going on, and they felt a partnership. They felt enclosed in being able to understand what was going on and provide values to those agencies as cleanup progressed, understanding that when cleanup is done, it's not cleaned up. There will be contamination out there in perpetuity, but to do the best possible cleanup, keeping people safe. Okay, the HAB is incredibly diverse by design, including Native Americans, local and county municipalities, public interest groups, site employees, public at large members, and other members. Getting educated about Hanford issues, listening to each other, developing advice based on common values, and being a partner in cleanup. I felt, as I'm sure many of you will feel, that you're a partner in cleanup when you are able to participate in these meetings. They have always operated by consensus. That was by design, so that people would listen to each other, they would understand what common values they had, and concentrate on those. Nobody comes to the table thinking, I'm going to block this advice. That's not why you participate in it. It's how can I make that advice be part of what my group is interested in, that we can reach success in cleanup. The HAB, each member looks for common ground. Since 1993, the HAB has issued 313 pieces of consensus advice. Do you know how extraordinary that is? That people are listening to each other, bringing business interests, environmental groups, Native Americans, bringing all those people together because they have a common goal. Shortly after the HAB was born, other sites across the DOE complex created their own advisory boards. Although there are 6 to 7 major differences between the HAB and its sibling boards at other sites, they all have the same purpose: to provide advice or recommendations about site cleanup based on their values in their communities. In the spirit of transparency, HAB meetings are open to the public, and we encourage people to learn. And the first thing you have to do is learn, as you heard Jerry's presentation, which is extraordinary. Historically, the HAB members worked with agency staff to create each year's work plan that included topics proposed by the agencies and by HAB membership. The work plan then feeds into the committee and full board meeting schedules based on the topics that need to be discussed, that both the agencies and board members feel that there is an interest in. Originally, the full HAB met more than 6 times a year. Subcommittees met as needed based on what work was needed and what expectations of advice from the agencies were expected, as well as from advice board members created and felt it was necessary to provide. The original budget for the HAB, mind you, none of the people sitting around the table were paid directly. It's always been volunteer. So the budget for the HAB is for facilitation, for administration, for those kinds of costs, meeting room costs when they're necessary, was over $1 million. And as a chair, I would work with the Department of Energy to determine what we would expect based on the number of meetings that would be planned for the coming year and what the budget would be. I don't know that that continues, but it's in our foundational documents, which I hope all of you take the time to read. Please read the convening report. Please read the process manual, those documents. It's really important to help you understand how to participate. And I want you to know every voice is important. Nobody's voice is more important than yours at the table. So, but become educated, because then you can really participate fully. I've asked the facilitation team to provide you with 3 documents, and one of them is already in your booklet. The Hanford Advisory Board Values. This is a statement that was worked on for more than a year to determine how we can take all of this technical knowledge and put that into advice that reaches a policy level. Because you have to understand some of the technical stuff, because those are where decisions are made and what affects the policy for those. So I would encourage you to all read those HAB values, understand them. And the other 2 documents are decision flow charts. Each of these flow charts took more than a year of work by many Hanford Advisory Board members to develop. And these were created to help the agencies understand how board values can be applied when they're making decisions about cleanup. Central Plateau remedial actions, and let's say the groundwater values flow chart. These are really seminal documents, and I hope you all take them to heart and use them because they are really will help you as you're crafting advice to come up out of the weeds, because we need those weeds to kind of understand how those weeds are going to affect cleanup decisions. But as you craft advice, as you ask questions, keep these values and flow charts in mind, because it will help you formulate your questions. It will help you understand how the information and the technical information is connected as they make decisions, cleanup decisions. Hanford site cleanup is now scheduled into the 2070s, I believe, looking at the latest. I don't think any one of us. Okay, pretty much none of us are going to be alive, I suspect, when that happens. But you can do your part now, because it's these incremental steps of cleanup that are really important. And it's important for the government agencies to understand citizen values as they make these cleanup decisions. And welcome, and I hope you enjoy your time on the board. And it's really a wonderful volunteer organization, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any questions? I'm using my outside voice. This is a big room.
Thank you, Susan, and thanks for those apples. Yeah.
No questions?
And Susan will also be on the bus this afternoon, so if you have any questions,
Thank you all.
she'll be available.
Another break. So when we come back, we're going to be talking about how the HAB works, and you'll get some introduction to the various committees of the Hanford Advisory Board. So please come back at 10:30. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sue. So as we regather, we are going to get a member orientation from the facilitation team, Ruth Nicholson, who keeps us on process. And so this is her way of helping you to understand how things move forward. And we know that Ruth would have done it from this room if she didn't have a cough. So I'm sure it will be educational.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, if my voice gives out, Josh will pinch hit. This is a little different. Normally I'm flipping slides for somebody else. So it's really fascinating to be online and experiencing a meeting and what I inflict on others. So what I want to do in about a dozen slides is talk about what do you need to know to engage as a HAB member. And this is sort of the Cliff Notes version of those binders that the facilitation team gave you when you came in this morning. So let's go to the next slide. Oh, this is going to be weird. Yeah, so we've made each of these slides map to something in your notebook. I actually don't expect you to go home and read the notebook tonight. But as a resource for finding things when questions come up, I want that binder to be there for you. So we've got, the HAB does have a process manual. We're in the process of updating it. You know, every now and again, you've got to look at your procedures and then think, you know, do they need a little tweaking? But there is a copy of that in your binder. For today, I want you to know that there's a description of all of the HAB committees under tab 7. There are 6 committees. One of them is basically the executive committee. The other 6 are where a large body of the work of the HAB happens. The first 3 on this list, budgets, health, safety, and public involvement, we use the acronyms. We live in acronym land. But that's what those acronyms stand for. Those first 3 committees are cross-cutting because those issues hit in a variety of places on the sites, in the committees. And so they're standalone committees, but they weave into our two technical committees. Our two technical committees are what we call River and Plateau and Tank Waste. And one of those names may make sense and the other's confusing. Back in the early 2000s, they divided the site. It used to be one site, and they divided off the work in the tank farms and created the Office of River Protection from the main site, which we call all RL or Richland. So when we reorganized the committees for the HAB, all the tank stuff went to one committee, and everything else that wasn't tanks went to what we call River and Plateau. That's where that name came from. As it turned out, those committees also roughly align with our regulators. The Department of Ecology does a lot of the regulatory work for the tanks. EPA does, the Environmental Protection Agency does a lot of the work in Superfund that's in the River and Plateau areas. So we are going to invite the committee chairs in about 20 minutes to give you their best pitch as to why you should come play with their committee. Next slide. So the way to get involved with the committee, the way the committees work right now is you can select up to 2 committees on which you're a voting member. Budgets, health, safety, river and plateau, or tank waste. Pick 2 of the 4. Everybody, if you want to be, can be a member of the Public Involvement Committee. And you're going to hear Dan explain that a little bit. Now, that doesn't mean you can't participate on all the committees. You can actually go to every committee meeting you ever want to go to. You just can only be a voting member for 2 of the committees off the top list and the Public Involvement Committee if you want to be. If that's a little confusing, it's actually a function of managing the HAB travel budget. That's where these limitations came from. Is trying to manage that budget, which is, we've got to make the most out of what money we have to operate. Next slide. Meetings. So how do you participate in these things? You heard Jan say at the top of the meeting that we haven't been able to meet together in person for what, 2.5 years? We've only been able to have in-person meetings since last May. And now all our meetings are hybrid, meaning you can come in person or you can dial in. So we're learning how to do that better. We love it when you tell us this was a good experience, this wasn't, what can we do to make that better? The platform we use is Microsoft Teams. And there is a guide at tab 9 of how to deal with Microsoft Teams if you're not familiar with it. Josh put that together for us. And so when we have meetings now, we'll have an in-person component, and Microsoft Teams is the way people are going to dial in to participate if they're not in the meeting room. So we use it for full board meetings, we use it for committee meetings, we use it for issue manager teams. I'll tell you what that is in a minute. It also is a place where we can share documents, and it's got a chat feature so you can have asynchronous conversations. Issue manager teams are like subcommittees or work groups of committees that work on specific projects. And we'll get into that in just a minute. So the next slide talks about how do we set up meetings and calls. And I have to start it with an apology because we're a real email heavy bunch. Most of the emails you get from the facilitation team, the first 3 letters will be HAB. So if you're good at sorting your email, you can sort the HAB stuff out, right? But you're going to get 2 notices for every meeting or every call. And the reason is We will send out a calendar invitation that can link up with whatever calendar you use. And then we will send a regular email notice. They have exactly the same information in them. But what we've learned is that not everybody's computer system can deal with the calendar invitations. So you actually get 2 notices for each meeting. So what you want to look for is the date and time of the meeting, the purpose of the meeting. If we ever send you a notice without a purpose of a meeting, you need to stomp on our toes. If there's not a purpose for the meeting, we shouldn't be having it. And then we will attach documents to both the calendar invitation and the email so that you have the paper you need, well, electronically, right? Agendas, maybe they're draft minutes, documents you're working on. All of that is typically attached to that email and to that calendar invitation. So you have all of that together to know what to read and prepare for the meeting. One of the quirks of Microsoft Teams, hang on a sec, I'm gonna make it, is that Microsoft Teams has a unique link for every meeting and every call. So if you use an old link, you probably won't find the meeting you're looking for. The other thing is if it's a 2-day meeting, like the HAB meeting that's coming up tomorrow and Thursday, there's a different link for day 1 as compared to day 2. So the calendar invitations are going to have the right meeting links. If you're looking at an agenda for a meeting, the meeting links are going to be right up top. And if it's a 2-day meeting, it'll have 2 different links, one for day 1, one for day 2. So pay attention to that so you don't end up in a meeting that has already passed. The other thing that we have, if you want to look ahead and figure out, how are you going to juggle all of the pieces of your life? The annual HAB work plan and calendar, look for tab 6. What's in there is the provisional calendar for fiscal year 2023. In the federal world, they don't work on a calendar year. They don't go January to December. They go October 1st to September 30th. I don't know who dreamt that up, but that's how we roll. So fiscal year 2023 starts October 1st, 2022. And so that calendar that's in your binder is the provisional calendar for this fiscal year's worth of work, and it's color coded. So red boxes are board meetings and blue boxes are committee meetings and their committee calls and some other things. The board needs to adopt its work plan and calendar at some point. I don't know if that's going to be this week or if it's going to be in November, but it will be soon. And to let you know, under the Federal Advisory Committee Act, so this is an advisory board chartered under the Federal Advisory Committee Act. We call it FACA. There are a whole bunch of requirements about record keeping and whatnot under the federal law. One of them is that we keep good records of what was done at our meetings. And another is we track who comes to our meetings. So part of that is that we record all of our meetings. I'll have meetings, all committee meetings. And we need to give you notice because in Washington, you can't be recorded and not know it. Josh cleans up those recordings and they're posted on hanford.gov. So if you ever are dying to relive a meeting, there are both meeting minutes and there are meeting recordings. So next slide. Okay, so Lacey, I'm going to steal the screen from you. Let's see if it worked. It worked. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the resources on hanford.gov, and I'm only going to give you 3. There's a whole bunch of stuff on this site. But if you go to hanford.gov and you go down here to outreach, and you go over to Hanford Advisory Board. That's our place. There's a whole bunch of information here. You heard Susan talk about the convening report. Under governance documents, there's the convening report, there's an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, there's our operating ground rules, there's our work plans and calendars, and the charter, SSAB stands for Site Specific Advisory Board. These are our national documents. So when people refer to guiding documents, this is where you find them. We've got a piece, all the membership of the board, the membership of each committee. Advice and responses, you can look up every piece of advice the board has ever given and how the agencies reacted to it. What was their response? What did they say about it? So as you go down here, you'll see full board meeting information. For every meeting, there's the recording, the agenda, all of the documents that go with those meetings, the October meeting, the June meeting, the March meeting, you can go back. It's also a resource for the committees. So you can go into the River and Plateau and see their past meetings, their agendas, presentations from the agencies. So one of the things at Hanford.gov is when you go to outreach, you can go to Hanford Advisory Board and find a lot of stuff. Another thing is there's a lot of public involvement that goes on. And if you go all the way over to public involvement opportunities, if you track down below the great picture, this is where you're going to find public comment periods, public meetings, what's coming up in the world of Hanford decisions. One of the things that the Public Involvement and Communications Committee tracks are what's coming down the pike, what's next. So outreach, you've got the Hanford Advisory Board, and you've got public involvement. Now, one of the things when you're working in HAB land that gets confusing are acronyms. And we got an acronym for everything. But if you go up here to the search bar and type in acronym, there's this thing called abbreviations and acronyms at the Hanford site. I keep this open on my second computer for every meeting I facilitate, whether I'm there in person or online, because if you type in something, it will tell you what it is. So Hanford.gov, type in acronyms. This is an incredible resource. Lacey, can you pull up the presentation again? Okay. So let's go to, okay, 6 slides, 10 minutes. I got to talk faster. Let's go to the next slide and talk about advice. You keep hearing the term advice. Well, what the heck is advice? Well, I'll tell you, advice looks like a letter. That's really what it looks like. But the way it's developed is through 3 layers of consensus. You heard Susan talk about consensus. And it's such a powerful thing. Boards of interest who operate by consensus, in my experience, are some of the best advisory boards around. In HAB land, we start with what we call issue manager teams. These are just small work groups of people who care about an issue. And a committee creates this small work group called an IM team and says, go learn about this topic. Go figure out what the key questions are, what the key issues are. And the issue manager team can either just do research and report back to the committee, Or it can draft advice, or it could draft other products. Advice is not the only HAB product. Sometimes they're white papers or other things. The thing you want to remember, and I will harp at you because I'm the process geek, issue manager teams do not speak for the HAB. Okay, we don't speak for each other on the HAB. You're not going to find me saying, whoa, I went to this meeting and you'll never guess what Josh said. No, we speak for ourselves. We speak for our organizations that we represent. We don't speak for the general board unless it's advice that has consensus and you can say the board said in its advice on this issue. We're very careful about that. So the issue manager team goes out, it researches a topic, it drafts advice, says, we think we should do this, and it brings it to the committee. Consensus at the issue manager level, then we go to the committee level for consensus. And the issue manager team says, this is what we learned and this is what we think we should say. And the committee talks about it. Sometimes it edits it, improves it, and says, you know what, this is ready to go to the full board. Committee has consensus on taking that product to the full board. Again, committees don't speak for the full board. They recommend to the board, they recommend action to the board. So now we're going to the full board. We've got advice. In essence, we've got a draft letter is what we got. Board meetings tend to be 2 days. So on the first day, the committee introduces the draft advice and says, here's the issue, here's the background, here's what we think we ought to say. And the board talks about it. And sometimes the night between day 1 and day 2, there's some wordsmithing that gets done. And on day 2, you've got some options. We can adopt the advice by consensus. No, I didn't say vote. Or you say, yeah, it's not quite fully baked. The cake needs to go back in the oven, and send it back to committee to do some more work. There are pieces of advice that have taken more than a year to get through this process to adoption. So let's talk about consensus. It's the next slide. There's a resource in your binder under operational ground rules that talks about consensus and the HAB. It's one of the best pieces I've ever seen in any advisory board. But I'll tell you, my simplified definition of consensus has 3 parts. One is I understand it. Don't agree to anything you don't understand, okay? And with the HAB, there's a background and a learning process that happens with a bunch of our advice because, well, some of the stuff on site has got a lot of different components to it. So I understand it is your first bar. I can live with it. This is one of the powerful pieces about a consensus advice, because I can live with it is a range from, I think this is the greatest thing since peanut butter, down to, oh, I'm not terribly comfortable, but I'm not in opposition. If you are living in the space of over my dead body, you are not in consensus. But I can live with it as a broad range of agreement. You don't have to love it 100% to live with it. But the third part is the magic part, which is I'll support it. That means after the group comes to agreement in the meeting room and we say, we support this advice and the chair's going to sign it, we don't walk out in the hall and undercut it and say, well, I didn't really agree with that. So I understand it. I can live with it. I'll support it. Every HAB seat has a voice in the consensus. So you want to make sure for whatever agency, whatever organization you're representing, if you have an alternate, make sure that the 2 of you are on the same page about your organization's interest. Okay? And I know that some of all y'all have interesting staff meetings before you come to HAB meetings to discuss what is the position, what are the perspectives we want to bring forward from our organizations. Because internally, you might have some debate. That's okay. When you come to the HAB, you're representing the city of, the organization of, the state of, you're representing your organization. That's what a board of interest is. The exception is for the public at large members. It's a little trickier. But everyone else, you're representing a constituency at the table. So next slide is, well, what happens if there's not agreement? Because sometimes that happens. You can send the draft advice back from the HAB back to the committee, and the committee can send it back to that issue manager team and say, keep working on it. Sometimes the agreement is small and we edit the letter, we edit the draft advice overnight from day 1 to day 2 at a HAB meeting. Sometimes groups will look at it and say, man, this is an important piece of advice, but I'm not with you. Or it's a conflict of interest with the group I represent. You can abstain from advice. Your group, the organization you represent, can say, we're not going to block this advice. We will abstain and the advice will pass. And there's a note on the advice that says this group has abstained from the consensus. In rare occasions, you can actually have majority or minority reports at the bottom of the advice. I agreed with 3 of the points in the advice and my organization doesn't agree with number 4. All of those are possible, but it's a part of the conversation that you have. The beauty of consensus is if one of the seats at the table says, I'm really worried about this, the group talks about that worry. What is it about that that needs attention, that needs revision, that needs inclusion? Voting creates winners and losers. It just does. Consensus broadens the discussion and the interests that you are looking at and considering. Okay, consensus is a messier process and it takes longer than voting. But Robert and his rules almost never show up at HAB meetings. He doesn't have a name tag. Okay, so I'm going to give you some tips about participating in meetings on the next couple slides. So we're really thrilled that we're having in-person meetings, and I'm really not thrilled at not being here. If you come in person, you're going to see Josh and Lacey. Make sure you sign in on the sign-in sheets for the HAB meetings and committee meetings because we've got to keep those lists. If you want to speak at a HAB meeting, you don't have them at this meeting, but we have these plastic name tents. We've literally had them since, Susan's going to laugh at me, at least 1995. Those plastic name tents, they're ancient, but you wonk them on their side and they stand up and that's the visual cue. If you're in a committee meeting, just raise your hand or wave at the facilitator. The facilitation team tracks what we call the queue. And it's an amalgam of both people in the room and people who have dialed in on Teams. So it's a consolidated list. And the reason it's a list is there's so many of you that we try to go in order. It's kind of the fairest way we can figure out to do it. Some days it's a little cumbersome. If we get the order wrong, just tell us and we'll fix it. Because sometimes a lot of moving parts. If you're in the room and you also want to log in via Microsoft Teams, you can do that. Just go to the top of the HAB agenda and log in. Like right now, we've got 10 people online. About half of them are in the meeting room and half of them are logged in, not in the meeting room. That's kind of normal. Know that hybrid meetings, where you have an in-person component and a computer component, runs slower than in-person meetings. The minute you add that computer component, it slows it down a little bit. Okay, 2 more slides. If you're online, log in at the top of hand agendas. We tend to open the meeting link 15 to 30 minutes early so that we can troubleshoot technical problems. The way you sign in online is you type your name and your organization in the chat box. If you call in on the phone only, we'll check in with you to see who you are. In online meetings, I have this unique power that I can mute everybody all at once. I don't do it very often. Only you can unmute yourself. Okay, there's a microphone icon in Teams that's a toggle off and on. If you are on the phone, you press *6 and you unmute yourself. I cannot unmute you, only you can only unmute yourself. And the most important slide is when you need help, where do you go? If you're in the meeting and you're online, use the chat to say, help, I need whatever. There are 36 seats on the HAB. That's 68 primary and alternate members. That's a lot of potential communication. So I actually don't respond to emails and texts and phone calls during meetings because it's a little much to keep track of. Gary Younger is our federal coordinator. And I've also put the email and the phone number for the facilitation team. We do have individual emails and individual phone numbers, but the fastest way to get our attention is to use what's on the screen because all of us monitor those 2 things. So if one of us isn't available, someone else is going to pick it up and be able to help you. Darn, I ran 2 minutes long. The last piece is travel is handled by the Department of Energy. That's Gary Younger. Unless you say, well, I live in the Tri-Cities, I probably won't travel. We're working on a potential regional meeting in the spring. In HAB speak, regional means not in the Tri-Cities. So we're looking at trying to have a meeting in April in Yakima, which means more of you may travel than you think. So get with Gary because there's some steps involved in setting up an account and getting travel authorized and then getting your travel expenses reimbursed. You want to do all that stuff as early as possible because there are a number of steps that go with that. But that's not something the facilitation team actually handles. Last thought, if you don't read anything else we send you on Thursdays, at the end of the day, we send out a weekly update. It has announcements, it has upcoming meetings and calls, it has the correspondence with the HAB for the week, it has contacts for travel. If you can't remember who to call, it has their names and their contacts. The Thursday update is going to keep you in touch with what's going on with the HAB, kind of all at once on Thursday afternoons. What questions do you have? Yeah.
2 questions. The PowerPoint presentation, is that accessible or can we get a copy of it?
Yes. Josh, can you add that to our list? To email a copy of this to everybody?
Yes. And the other question, most meetings, are they going to be held here? Board meetings?
Right now, we're trying to nail down a more consistent meeting location. Right now, most of the committee meetings are being held where you are because Ecology not only has the room, it's got the technology to do the hybrid. Full board meetings, we're trying to figure out if we're going to use hotels or the Washington State University meeting rooms. And it's a function of space, like how many people will those rooms handle? With the advent of hybrid meetings, we still don't have a good way to figure out, are all 36 seats going to show up, or are some people going to dial in or not? And so sizing meeting rooms is actually a little bit of a Rubik's Cube right now. So board meetings are bouncing around a little bit until we kind of nail down that tactical thing. But for the foreseeable future, I think committee meetings will be at Ecology. I'm looking at Ryan. Is that fair to say? Ryan?
Yeah.
Okay. Board meetings just won't fit in the space you're in. Otherwise, I might be begging Ryan for more use of his meeting rooms.
And to clarify, the board meeting tomorrow is not going to be here. It's
So the convention center.
yeah.
So where's that going, what?
The Three Rivers Convention Center in Kennewick.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, board meeting tomorrow is at the convention center.
Thank you, Ruth. I think we need to move on to the committee discussion. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, I mean, if there are no more questions, my voice is going.
One question. Could you clarify how people can get documents off our team's website? I know Dan has posted several and others. How do people reach those? How do they know what's there?
Josh, can you field that, please?
Essentially, anything that is posted to teams, say in a committee channel, there'll be a files tab just to the right of the discussions tab. If you click on that, it'll list everything that has ever been posted. Sometimes organized specifically, sometimes by date. If you want to explore that and take a look, I can help with anything further.
Yes, I've been struggling with getting, there's a function on Teams that if somebody posts something on a team that you're on, you should get a notification. And I've been struggling with my Android system to make that happen, and I just haven't had much luck. So do other people get notifications when somebody posts a team if you're on that team, or is that hard for everybody?
No, not me. I haven't got it.
I can talk to you afterwards.
Okay, yeah, that's something, that's a capability that should be developed.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ruth. So obviously you can't know everything about the HAB website on the first day, but going home and taking some time to click through some of these things, there are treasures yet undiscovered. So you can have some fun with that and get oriented at the same time. So one of the things that we want to do before we leave for the tour is to give each chairman of the committees an opportunity to talk about the kind of work that they do and extend an invitation to each one of you. We really want you on the committees because that's where the work is done. So on our agenda, Becky from I want to say Health, Safety, Environmental Protection Committee will begin.
Thank you. I'm so sorry to interrupt, Becky. Thank you so much. We just wanted David Bowen to just come in and give his little introduction.
I was trying to figure out how not to be disruptive. I don't think there's a good way. Sorry I couldn't be here this morning, but so welcome to the Nuclear Waste Programs facility and to the HAB, the new members. Really appreciate everything you guys do to kind of give us advice, talk through and think about better ways of doing work on the site and making progress going forward. I see you got a bus out here, so you're gonna go on a tour this afternoon, which is fantastic. There's nothing better than seeing it firsthand. But I just wanted to say real quick hello, and my email's there, my phone's there. I'm generally here at least 3 days a week if I'm not on the other side of the mountains. And, yes, sir, go ahead.
Who are you?
I'm sorry, David Bowen, Nuclear Waste Program Manager. Should have done that. That happened this morning on a Teams call as well from somebody else. Sorry about that. So anyway, I just truly do appreciate, and I know my team does, all the work that you guys do and the time and energy that goes into being on this particular board. And thanks to Ruth and for facilitating and getting the cats herded in all the right directions. think that's about it, unless anybody has questions, or Ryan, if you want me to cover anything else.
I get.
Thank you, and that's my fault, I should have introduced you, sorry about that.
No, no, it's not your fault.
Yeah, and so, thank
What do you
you.
work for, or? I'm Department of Ecology, I'm the Nuclear Waste Program Manager here. Been in this role almost 2 years now. And with ecology, I'm in my 7th year. If that matters.
Thank you, David, and I'm
Okay,
sorry
bye.
to interrupt you, Jan, and Becky,
Thanks, everyone.
please move ahead.
Okay. Well, that's all right. It gave me some time to think because I didn't prepare a speech. I wasn't sure. I'm the chair of the Health, Safety, Environmental Protection Committee. Our committee is, like they said, it's cross-cutting. We've done quite a bit of work in the committee. A couple of examples are we've dealt a lot with the Hanford site traffic safety, which is a huge issue on the site. I know for myself, I feel like the most dangerous part of my job is driving to work and driving home from work every day. Although I work in, with radiation and contamination every day, I feel like that's, it's a huge factor. We've issued a couple of pieces of advice on the Hanford site traffic safety. We've invited speakers to come. And since that time when we did issue the advice, we've had, I think, 3 or 4 more fatalities at those same places that we issued the advice on. So, it's getting, at this point, I think it's starting to get a lot more attention from the state and the federal government. But those are some things that are on our radar, the traffic safety. I don't know if many of you know or are familiar with the Hanford Site Beryllium program. That program was not in existence several years ago. The HSEP committee wrote several pieces of advice on that as well. And so the Beryllium program is now in full swing on the Hanford site. That's to protect the workers at the Hanford site from the dangers of working with beryllium. We have a lot of sensitized workers, and we have workers that are that have full-blown, berylliosis. So that is another item. We also work with the respiratory protection standards on the site. We've done, I'm trying to think what else we have done. The tank vapors, years ago, the tank vapors were a huge issue. It was a cross-cutting effort with the Tank Waste Committee, but the HSEP committee also had a lot of input as far as tank vapors. So we've done a few tours at the Hammer facility. We've gone there, watched them do the rad worker training. Like I said this morning, we have something planned for the 324, not the actual building itself, but the mock-up facility, which is a full-scale mock-up of the 324 airlock, where they would go in and start cleaning out the B cell and cleaning out the airlock. So that's planned for next month. You will see in your packet here, if you look, the dates are for the RAP and the HSEP need to be flip-flopped. We had to make some changes to accommodate people's work schedules. So, there's a lot of cool stuff. We've had a lot of speakers come to talk to the HSEP committee. We're always open to, other items. It's not just the workforce that we're, that we talk about. We're also talking about the environment and the public as well. Where's the safety zones? How do we've done a lot of stuff with emergency preparedness as well. The Hanford site full-up drill that they had, a couple of members of the HSEP committee attended that and went to the EOC at the basement of the federal building. So there's a lot of things to learn. I'm still learning and I work here. So, yeah. So we've kind of had a lot of turnover, and so we don't have a lot of people left on our committee. So I'm not even sure we can call ourselves a committee at this point. I think there's 3 of us. But so yeah, I'm asking if anybody's interested to join the HSEP committee. Next month is our planned outing, so it should be a lot of fun. Thank you.
Are you doing this, Becky?
I'm sorry, Lacey. are
I
you-
can do it if you want, yeah. So who would like to go next? Tom?
Sure. Hi again. So I am the chair of the River and Plateau Committee. As Bruce sort of described, we handle everything at the site that isn't tanks or the bid plant, basically. Included in that scope is the infrastructure to support the tank mission, but we mostly handle the circular remediations, the groundwater, the dirty dirt, new and emerging technologies for treating that groundwater and dirty dirt, and sort of the landfills on site, some of the models. We have really spirited discussions in just about every meeting where someone has a passion about a certain waste site or project and sort of can do almost a book report to sort of spread the knowledge. And then we have a discussion about that and have had some really good discussions of late about transuranic wastes and waste classifications, that type of thing. Our next meeting is November 9th here, and it's going to be groundwater, all the time. So we're going to be talking about the new updated plume maps. We're going to be talking about the cumulative impact evaluation, which is a great new modeling tool that's coming out the last couple of years and will be used for decisions in the Central Plateau. And the carbon tetrachloride remediation update, they're optimizing that system. So come learn, there are no stupid questions. The only stupid question is a question unasked. We're here to spread the knowledge, and we have a good chunk of the advice starts out in RAP, River and Plateau RAP. As an added bonus, I write up a summary of documents that are posted since the last meeting called the RAP sheet. So you can find those on the website for the past couple meetings and just see what's current.
That would make you the rat master.
I guess so. We don't do that whole hierarchy. So
Thank you so much, Tom. Chris, did you want to go for the?
Yeah, I'm the chair of the Budget and Contracts Committee. I made some notes at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'll read from them, and I hope they make sense. We're concerned with the overall cost and schedule of Hanford cleanup. Cost and schedule is estimated by DOE in various documents they put out. We're concerned with the amount of funding that Hanford receives from Congress each year and whether the difference between the estimated cost of cleanup and the funding that Congress appropriates to the DOE, that's a matter of concern with us. We're concerned with how that funding is spent in each year and on what projects that funding is spent. As Brian Vance indicated this morning, DOE personnel do not actually perform cleanup activities. DOE hires contractors to perform cleanup work. So we're concerned with how effective those contracts are. And on those occasions when DOE invites public comments on upcoming contracts, in the past we have taken the lead in collecting comments from BCC members and maybe other members and forwarding those comments to DOE, not as official HAB documents, but as private citizens. One of the things that we will be getting into this year are milestones. Milestones are formal legal agreements among DOE, US EPA, Department of Ecology on dates as to when work must be completed or initiated. Those are legal agreements. Therefore, if you have a date when certain work must be completed, you need to get funding in order to complete that work. You can't do work without funding. So milestones drive funding. But the United States is in a fiscally constrained environment. There's a lot of money that's being appropriated by Congress to alternative energies, to infrastructure. You've all read this in the news. DOE is operating in a fiscally constrained environment. And so we're in a situation now where if you can't get the funding to meet milestones, then funding drives milestones instead of milestones driving funding. So that gives opportunity for advice and input. We are cross-cutting, our scope is a cross-cutting scope across all activities. We don't get into technical details, we don't get into technologies. That's what the RAP committee does, that's what the tank waste committee does. But we do kind of oversee those from a cost and schedule. If you're new to cleanup at Hanford, if you're new to how cleanup is performed at Hanford, if you're not a chemist, a geologist, or an engineer, you're not maybe really technically inclined, the BCC committee is an excellent committee to join. Because when you join the committee, it gives you an excellent overview of a broad scope of activities and a broad scope of issues that you might not get otherwise. So I urge you to consider, depending on your interest, your training, your newness to Hanford, to consider the BCC. Now, Ruth has talked about IM teams. One of the pieces of advice that the BCC puts out every year is we give advice to DOE on what our constituencies feel is the most important work to be performed. We do this, we talk about work 2 years in advance because the budget cycle and the funding cycle works 2 years in advance. So we have an IM team that I'm asking for members to consider joining to look at what work do we recommend DOE prioritize for 2025. If DOE incorporates our advice and they can incorporate that in their budget request going up to EM headquarters and then to Congress. So we are working 2 years in advance. And if you'd like to be part of that IM team, let me know, Chris Sutton. My email address is in the notebook, or you can email Ruth or someone on the facilitation team and they can give your name to me. And what you'll hear from every member, every other committee chair is we've lost a lot of members on the HAB, so all of our committees are reduced in membership. We don't have the number of members right today that we had 6 months ago. So any committee you decide to join, it gives you an excellent opportunity to participate, have your voice be heard. Irrespective of what committee you join, the best thing you can do is to participate, and speak up. That's what we're all about. So that's what I have to say about BCC committee and committees generally.
Thank you, Chris. Did you have something to say, Tom?
I was just going to join the IM team.
Oh, great. Okay, Dan, would you, Dan's like to talk about the public involvement.
Hi, Dan Solis, the interim chair of the Public Involvement Committee. This is a committee that's open to everybody. It doesn't count against your 2 committee limits. Please come to our meetings, even if you don't want to be a full-time, all-the-time member of the PIC. If you've got an issue from your own committee that you need public involvement, public exposure to, come to the PIC committee and lobby for that. That's the benefit of the open membership on the PIC committee. It's an opportunity to gain broader support for your other committee's interests and issues and shape the way they're presented to the public. And this is essential in getting funding, is the way the tri-party agencies present these issues to the public in formal meetings. And the PIC committee helps the tri-party agencies, the Department of Energy, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Washington Department of Ecology design and shape these meetings so that make the most effective use of the time and the money to present these crucial issues to the public and then get public input back. And so it not only does it give public input back, but the public takes a more interest in lobbying their legislators to get money for the Hanford cleanup. So the PIC is driving funding as much as any other committee. And in the PIC, you'll get an opportunity to work with committee members from other committees. So it's cross-cutting in kind of a relationship sort of way. And service on the PIC is an opportunity for you to be on the executive committee because there's two positions coming up, the chair and the vice chair. The chair and the vice chair also serve on the executive issues committee, so you get a chance to shape the HAB agenda for the year to come by being an executive, being the chair or vice chair of a committee. So if those openings open up and you feel like you'd like to stay on the PIC or any other committee, like jump in because you get an additional committee, the executive issues committee, to help promote your views. And lastly, the work of the PIC committee may not hold the attraction of more technical issues dealt with in other committees for many of you. So if so, please consider the service on the PIC committee as payback for the privilege of being on the HAB and other HAB committees. It's kind of like paying rent on your airspace in the other committees as being a member of the PIC. It's more of a duty than a pleasure, I think, for most folks, because the technical issues, let's face it, are much more interesting, much more fun, much more sexy. You get to make more technical impacts on the process. Here it's public relations. There are people who really like public relations, but I suspect most people don't. So service on the PIC committee is kind of a way of paying your dues for being on the HAB. I know it's a hard sell, but it's the only sell I got.
That was awesome, thank you, Jen.
As a public relations person, I would say that the PIC is the most important committee because people need to know what the hell you people are doing and why it's important. So
yes.
Join the PIC committee.
Yes, outreach is important. Okay, we're gonna turn the time to Rob for the takeaways committee.
Hi, my name is Rob Davis, and I'm really interested in people joining our group. At one point, we had 23 members of the Tank Waste Committee, and now I think we have half a dozen. So think about it. Some of the things the Tank Waste Committees paid attention to and issued some advice or supported advice from other committees in a joint effort has been everything from the vapors issues to we call it the rhino lining, but there's a couple tank farms out there that have got a barrier between the rain and snow and that and the soil and the tanks to prevent the driving of waste further deep into the soil. We supported that. We also have 4 IM groups that come out of our committee, and they kind of need some help. The first one would be the 242 evaporator. That's a very small group of people, and what we'd like to do is recognize the importance of that evaporator to the processing of LAW waste, and because it's the only operating evaporator we have for that process, and it's critical. If that shuts down or has problems, we're stuck. DFLAW requires you got to dewater that. So we're looking for reliability statements from DOE with all these updated modifications done to the facility. The second, probably one of the more important ones is our grout subcommittee or our IM team for grout. We're looking for people with any kind of knowledge in that area to help support. I think Jacob Reynolds has stepped up and said that he'd like to help with that. So did Susan, actually. Susan Coleman, she's still here.
Right here, Rob.
There you go.
I'm holding up the wall.
Yeah, looking for you. And I think that's a real important aspect here, and that we have to pretty soon offer some succinct advice on what we feel a path should go. We've kind of stalled out at this initiative to go get some of the waste grouted, and we need to reinforce and get going on that. Another one, and I think this is probably one of the more important ones, is the tank integrity issue manager. Tank integrity is very important. We've had a number of tank leaks out there, and each time it happens, we have real issues we have to deal with. I think that you get invited to listen to some experts from the site, on the contractor side, talk about things such as vessel inspections of single shell tank. SST means single shell tank, DST means double shell tank. So both the SSTs and the DSTs are undergoing extensive visual examinations. And in the case of the DSTs, they have crawlers and probes that are using ultrasonics to interrogate the volume of material, look for cracks or thinned areas. And then periodically they do this every five or so years, repeat it and do comparisons of that. And then, and we need some folks on that because we do have some issues coming up on some inspections that have come in this last cycle. And then the last one that we are involved in is, it's a very interesting, one of our members, Vince Pinesco, an expert Hanford, used to be I guess a leader of one of the reprocessing facilities. And Vince was convinced that we are missing the issue of lateral flow in the waters, the groundwaters that penetrate from the Hanford site down, saying that there are these ancient lake beds that act as lenses that will take the water coming from the sky or coming from leaks and tanks or whatever, and then tend to focus it off the lens and into the sides. And his questioning was mostly are we truly getting a representative understanding of what the waste is doing as it enters the groundwater, or are there other confounding factors in here? And so we need to close this down. We do feel, I think we need to close this one down in that one thing that Tom had pointed out is that the volume of water that we are dumping into our soil out there is a fraction of what it used to be. And so the main driving force of the radionuclides to the groundwater is greatly diminished. If I would encourage people to go type in on your computer when you go home, type in phoenix.pnl.gov. I think it's .gov. And there you'll be presented with a very wonderful thing that the RAP committee supported this over 10 years, 15 years ago. RAP committee really pressed them to let's publish the plumes. Let's know where the plumes are. Let's know where the sample points are, et cetera. And so this program really informs you a lot of where the underground radionuclides are at, where they're progressing to. I haven't found a lot of rate stuff yet on it, but it's a very technical site, but the very beginning pages of it are very easy to use. So you just type in what you're looking for, amount of iron in the soil, or something, and you'll see a nice plume where it's coming from. It's surprising some of them are coming not from the 200 area, but from further out. And so anyway, the tank waste committee really needs some help with people. I think there's a lot of other things that we can study within the tanks. I'm really anxious on learning some of the controls on the season construction capital project, as well as outlining some final dispositions of, what are we going to do with our K-Basin waste now that we've got it all handled and into our storage facility. Orphan waste is very important to me, not leaving things there unattended. And I think that's about it. It's a good committee. There's a lot of smart people on it. Really, I encourage people to think about the tank waste committee.
Thank you so much, Rob. Hey, we're getting short on time. We're supposed to leave for our bus. So I'll turn the time over to Jen. Tom Gallioto put in the chat, if you have any questions, feel free to email HAB@SLIND. Tom Cecilia put in the chat his information. Now you know all of the areas, but you're welcome to ask Josh or I for help. Go ahead.
Jan, can I say something real quick? Please, as a close the loop on the committees. Welcome to the HAB.
Do not feel intimidated by the conversations if you're a generalist like me, not an engineer, not a scientist. But you are valued. We need you in the committee meetings to help the technical people understand the common sense questions that your organizations, that your community is asking and needs to know. So don't get intimidated by the technical details. Bring those simple, basic questions that probably nobody else has asked or asked in the last decade or two. So you are very valuable. We need you at the table to balance off the conversation.
Thank you, Susan.
And can I just say one more thing? Sorry, tomorrow at the Three Rivers Convention is where our meeting will be held. There's no food or drink allowed. Please eat a really big breakfast and bring a snack in your car. So just to.
So you've had your overview of the committee structure for HAB. It is a smorgasbord of information and things that need to be done. So if anything appeals to you, please sign up for the committee because you will impact the outcome. Rob mentioned PNNL, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. There are a number of national laboratories around the country, PNNL. So he was talking about Phoenix, PNNL.org. And there are 3 cross-cutting committees, 2 technical committees, and everyone is a member of the PIP. And if you want to attend meetings, you should just let the committee, let the facilitators know that you want to be a part of the PIP committee. So their meetings are usually scheduled just before the HAB meeting so that you can attend as part of that week, or it's ahead of other committee meetings, so they are not standalone committees. So the next big thing is going over for our badging and going on the tour. So the bus awaits.
When we get off the bus,